I think we have it set up. Like I said, it's the first time I've used this platform. So I now have it recording. I think we're good. I think what will happen is when you go into the course content section of the course, so here sits your course. When you go into the course and you scroll down to course content and you hit week 1, actually I think you scroll all the way down on this section, you'll see a Panopto recordings folder. Right? And so if I've recorded the class and it has successfully uploaded, and it can take it a little while, it should show up there at the bottom of this section, which is where I put all the resources for the course. So I don't use some of the other sections. I figure go to one spot and get it all done there. So in the course content schedule section, other than the syllabus, I put it all right there. And if you go down all the way down, you'll be able to click on the recordings. And when it comes up, it'll show you the recordings. And so I did a 1 minute, I guess, recording here. Actually, I got 2 out there already. Actually, this one's recording right now, so we can't go into it. So that's it. But I did a short one, a 7-second one, so that if you weren't familiar with how to get into it, you could see how to do it. Plus, it helps me because I'm learning how to get into it. So if I click on it, it comes up, and I can hit play. And it starts playing. There's nothing on this one. It's a 7-second video. You can enlarge the screen that way and then make it small, or you can enlarge the computer screen, depending upon whether or not I'm doing something in a software or I'm doing something on the board. And that should help you out. So hopefully that will help you with Panopto. And I'm trying to learn it myself as I go. So I need to make that small and get out of it and go back to the course. So here we are. So welcome to the course. My name's Ty Handy. I've been teaching this course along with Advanced Data Analytics now for about 5 years here at U of L. I'm an adjunct instructor. I've taught at a number of other places, almost always adjunct, because like you, many of you, I have a day job. I'm the president of Jefferson Community and Technical College, have been for the last 10 years. We're a very data-driven institution, and I'm glad to say that when I got there, they were data-driven. So I have a great data team, and I'm able to, first they were a little nervous about me because they knew I was coming in with a background in that, but now I think they really know how much I value what they do for helping us. So that's my day job. I teach this course, one other, and then I teach a course in the Master of Accountancy program. So I've probably taught 20 sections over the last 5 years. But this particular course I last taught last fall. So it's been a little while. But I do a similar thing with some of the accountancy students, so I've had some extra work in it in that regard. My background is finance, so my undergraduate degree is in finance. However, I'll say that I spent, in my undergraduate program, my very first stats course, I had the best stats teacher you could ever want to have. And I just fell in love with the topic and the subject. And I wound up taking more stats courses as an undergrad than were required as finance courses. So I got a finance degree, but I think it was 27 hours of statistics courses as an undergrad. Every elective I could take, I took in that area. And so I just started a lifelong love of statistics and data analytics. And then when I went to grad school, like you, I pursued an MBA. Mine was in urban Philadelphia. Drexel University is where I went. Undergraduate was Western Kentucky University. Went off to the big city, and it was great. Because probably the best statistics teacher or the best faculty member I've ever worked for worked there, Dr. Carl Silver. He was in charge of the data department, and I became his teaching assistant as an MBA student. And it was a great job because he was, nationwide, he was known as who you called to come in front of a jury if you needed to explain to lay people what these statistics mean. So if there was a court case, for example, he was hired by the Tobacco Institute. This is back before the studies had really demonstrated beyond a doubt that smoking causes cancer. He was paid $10,000 a month to be available for the Tobacco Institute to go anywhere in the world, spur of the moment, to defend the tobacco companies in any lawsuit that needed. And he had about a half dozen of those kind of contracts. And the best thing about being his teaching assistant is from the day that I got there, his expectation was he might call me the night before a class and say, Ty, I'm in Phoenix, and I would have to go teach the class, even at the graduate level. So I would be teaching students that I had no business teaching. It really made me sharp. It helped me learn something, though, also, that once I had all that statistics, I kind of was full of myself. I thought I knew it. Until you've actually taught someone else something, that's when you really know you know it, right? Or you better, or you're going to get exposed. And so part of this course, what's important here, is that some of you have had most of the material we're going to cover in this first class. You need to help be a teacher on the team. And believe me, if you're helping those who haven't had the statistics, then you're going to know it better. And it's just going to pay off in droves for you. So don't be bored if it's a topic that you've already had. Plus, I'm going to try to approach them from a slightly different angle so that there's something new in everything we do, or hopefully there's something new in everything we do. So even if you've had some undergraduate stats and you feel comfortable with some of the basic stuff, hopefully we approach it from a little different angle and you feel engaged. That's the goal from my standpoint. So I finished my degree at Drexel. It was a real tough job market, early 80s. I'm pretty old. Pretty tough job market, but I got a really good job with R.R. Donnelley Company out of Chicago, Illinois. It's a major printing company. At the time, it was like the Fortune 150 and the Fortune 150. It's slid now. It's still in the Fortune 500 companies, but it's no longer as big as it was. But I was in mergers and acquisitions back in the 1980s when it was kind of a hot thing to be involved in mergers and acquisitions. Now, don't let me fool you. I was the grunt worker doing the analysis on the mergers and acquisitions, spent my day in front of Lotus 1, 2, 3 spreadsheets and using statistical tools and financial tools to try to figure out the hidden value in companies that they were hoping to buy. But it also further sharpened my sort of love of data and statistics. But I then decided, because of this faculty member that I had at Drexel, who kept saying to me, you don't want to go into corporate, Ty, you were cut out for academe. And so he kept saying, you need to go get your doctorate, you need to get your ticket punched, you need to go do that. And finally, after a couple years, I realized he was right, and I went back to school, picked up my doctorate degree, and then moved into administration, and I've been a president now for 25 years, I guess. Here for 10 years, my wife's from Louisville. It's a chance to come home. I got a son here who owns a financial management firm, so a couple of grandkids. And then prior to that, president of a college in Florida. If you vacation in the Destin, Fort Walton Beach area, there's Northwest Florida State College. I was president there for 6 years. And I'm from Orlando, Florida originally, so I'm kind of going back home there with that opportunity. Prior to that, in Vermont, at a university, 4-year institution, Vermont State University. I was president there for 5 years. Smaller university, but smaller school, and not nearly as big. Where I'm at now has 14,000 students. That one had about 1,500 or what have you. And then prior to that in Indiana at Ivy Tech State College, where the title was chancellor, but it's the same thing as president. So I've done that, and that was 5 years also. So about every 5 years, I've stayed ahead of the law and moved to a new job, and until here. They're going to have to run me off from here. I love Louisville. I love where I'm at. I think I'll be retiring here at some point. So I'm connected to the community, and I've been here for about 10 years. Let's see. What else do I need to talk about? You have in the guide here a syllabus. Let's take a few minutes and talk about it some, just so you get comfortable with what we're doing. I'll start out by saying this first course is intended to level the playing field. So what we find out in an MBA program everywhere is that Some people have a pretty good in-depth statistics background. Some people have hardly any. Some people have never even had a stats course because they majored in something that didn't require it, and so they're coming in green. So what we want to do with these first 5 weeks is level the playing field and kind of give you the tools, the basic tools that you're going to need to be able to use in the next course, which is a more advanced course, which I'll probably be teaching as well in the spring, and also in your classes as you prepare papers and things of that sort to help you out there with some of the basic stuff that you should be able to include in some of that work. So this first 5 weeks, I don't put a lot of grade pressure on folks, okay? No exam. We're not going to have an exam in the class. There'll be 2 types of assignments. I think there'll be 5 assignments. Oh, I need to look again, but I think there's 3 team assignments and 2 individual assignments. So this first week, it's an individual assignment, so you get a chance to figure out. Now, you've not been assigned to teams yet, right, officially? You don't have a cohort. So they used to, before the program started, everybody got assigned to a team, and in all the classes, you had the same team members, right? And so you got used to working in that small group. But they had to make so many changes in the first 5 weeks because of people's schedules changing and things of that sort. They now do that at the end of the first 5 weeks, I think. Okay, so I'm going to give you a team to work in for this time frame. You may or may not have some of those individuals for the entire program. I think they will assign you to a cohort team at some point. So you'll have a combination there of assignments, and they're not assignments that'll kick your tail or anything like that. This first course then we cover materials that if you had a solid entry, a full year, 2 semesters of stats as an undergrad, you've probably had all the formulas that we'll hit, right? I'm not as formula driven as you might think I'm going to be in statistics. I want to really approach it from the standpoint of a user, somebody who's going to get results and have to interpret those results and use those results. There's 50 of you in this class, and maybe 5 of you are going to end up in jobs where you routinely do your own data analysis, but 40 of you are going to end up in jobs where you're presented with data, and I want you to be able to call bullshit on the data that you see, because data has a way of shutting people up and not participating in the conversation because it's there on paper, it must be factual, right? So there's arguments about who said this. I think it was one of the previous U.S. presidents who said there's 3 kinds of lies. There's lies, there's damned lies, and there's statistics. And that quote was because once statistics are out there on the table, people feel like it's a done deal, and you can't argue with it. And I want you to be much more critical when you see a statistical study, when you see graphs of statistics and things of that sort. And rather than accept those to begin with, I want you to think they're wrong and then look for evidence that they're accurate. I want to flip that a little bit and have you engaged as you see things of why might that not be right? And if you're approaching it that way, you'll catch a lot more problems than you will otherwise. Anyways, in fact, there's a great song. If you're into folk music at all, Todd Snyder. Has anybody heard of Todd Snyder before? No? So there you go. That's your homework assignment. You go Google a video from Todd Snyder. If you don't mind an F-bomb, one of his songs is Statistician's Blues. And he starts out early in the song by saying 65% of statistics are made up right there on the spot. And 82.4% of people believe them, whether they're accurate statistics or not. And if you think about that, of course, he made that up right there on the spot, and people believe it because he made it right up there on the spot. And we tend to accept those sorts of things. So if I don't know what I'm talking about in front of a crowd, all I have to say is, well, I read one study where 72% of the people felt, and now all of a sudden nobody's going to question my position because they think it must be accurate because I've quoted some sort of statistic. And I want you to be able to troubleshoot those sorts of things. So let's go to the syllabus. Let's look at it a little bit. And let's see here. Download it. And open it up and just talk about it so you'll see what we're doing. All right, so I give you my phone number, cell number. Feel free to call my cell phone. If you're calling a little late at night and my wife answers for some reason, she tells me, explain that you're one of my students. And no problem though, call me at any time there. There's my cell number. I give you my personal Gmail account. Now if you email me through your U of L account, it does get forwarded. I don't know why. Sometimes I don't get some of those. So most of the correspondence, just feel comfortable, just use my Gmail account and come right to me directly that way. That works fine. I mentioned I have a day job, so if you do need to meet with me because you're struggling with this concept or that concept, we'll set something up. Be glad to do that. That's not a problem. I will say this, over the last 5 years, I've made that offer, and I think over a 5-year time frame, basically I've needed to meet maybe 3 or 4 times with somebody who needed some assistance or something. Usually we can handle it online, we can handle it by a phone call, or oftentimes your own team is able to help you figure out what's going on there, and it's just not been that big a deal. But I do work right downtown, and so forth and so on. I think these dates are right. So the way I tend to run the class is we'll go till about, in the 7:15 time frame. We'll take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll go through the rest of the class, and we'll get out when we've covered the content. Basically, it's one course that lasts one semester, 10 weeks, that they've split into 2 courses. So the way I set the class up, I know all the concepts we need to hit. We're going to hit them all over try to hit them all over a 9-week time frame. And I say that because inevitably there's been a snow day or there's been some sort of incident at some point along the line, a technology incident or something where we end up missing or I have to travel somewhere or something, and we miss one class. So I've set the content up so that we're covering everything. There's nothing missed, but we tend to be able to do it in one fewer class than on the schedule. And so if we push 9:30 sometime or something like that with class, recognize there's usually down the road a chance to get all that back, and then because we haven't, because of the way I structure the class. By the way, the first time I taught for U of L, I was given my assignment. I had about 3 or 4 days to get everything set up, and that was on a Monday. First night class was Tuesday, and on Tuesday afternoon, everything shut down around the world because of COVID. And so we pivoted immediately in a couple of hours to everything online for that entire class, and that taught me a real important lesson about going ahead and planning for the catastrophe in advance. So I try to structure the class so that we don't end up scrambling trying to get things done. So that's the schedule. 5 courses, I think, shouldn't be any issue. There are no required books for the class. I do have 2 that I recommend, and they're pretty straightforward and kind of enjoyable reading. The first one I've got here, it's called Naked Statistics. And so this is a paperback book. I don't know, costs $15 or something. Probably get it used for $5. It's a couple hundred pages long, but it's a weekend read. Although I would say the topics in here kind of line up with the course pretty well, so you wouldn't want to read through the whole thing. But it does a good job of not teaching you the statistics, but teaching you about the statistics. And so it's a good read. The students who've read the book have usually emailed me and said, I really like this. It really opened it up for me in terms of how to think about it. So it's not it's a mass market appeal book as opposed to a statistics textbook. The second one I've discovered more recently called, and I don't have a copy of it because my son took it, not the one that's here. I have another son who's a finance faculty member at Baylor University, and he took it and he loved it so much he's now telling his finance students they need to get it and read it, called Calling Bullshit, The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World. And it's as good as this one. It doesn't line up quite as perfectly with the topics that we hit, but it's a second book that's very good. It's a $20 book online at Amazon, and those are really worth, I think, the investment of a weekend or time in reading. If you're scared to death of statistics and you have to have a textbook, I would say wait. Don't do it yet, but this is the textbook that I kind of pull things from. And so there's an old trick for faculty members that, since I'm a part-time faculty member, I can share. You always want to assign the second best textbook to your students, and keep the best textbook in your office to be the crutch for your lectures. All right, so when you're ordering a textbook that's assigned from somebody, a faculty member, chances are they've got a better one that they're not telling you about, or what have you. Well, this is that one. It's a good textbook. If you need one, it's out there. It doesn't matter what edition you get, because I don't reference it in any way, but it does line up the course the way I kind of line up the course. And what we're really trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is get you ready for the second course in this series. And that's a deep dive into regression analysis. So some people have done a little bit of regression. Some people may have had a course in regression. But we go pretty deep in that second 5 weeks. And this first 5 weeks, I give you all the statistical tools you'll need to be able to handle what we do in that second course. If you do decide you want to get that textbook, don't get one where you have to pay for the extra access to software and stuff. U of L pays for all that. We have SPSS, we have SAS, we have everything you need to be able to do any of the problems or anything like that. So don't spend extra money on the course software. But I would say wait. I don't know that any of you are going to need that textbook. Those other 2 books, I recommend you get them and read them. The one thing I found out about my MBA studies, I guess, and hopefully you come in with this attitude as well, is that it's not undergraduate anymore. The faculty aren't doing their best to screen people out or anything of that sort. What we really want to do is get you engaged in the material, and we hope you're here because it's important to you to be engaged in the material. And you're going to get out of this MBA what you put into it. And some of you will put a lot into it, and you'll get a lot out of it. And some of you will put enough into it. And that'll show over time. It doesn't have to show in the course itself. I encourage you to take advantage of what you've got in terms of your studies and to make sure you put a lot into it, because it will pay back in droves, I can assure you. Certainly has for me. Okay, so that's that information. I do, because I'm expected to, kind of identify everything that we're going to try to understand and use in the class. That looks like a lot, but we'll pick off 2 or 3 bullets each week, and it won't be that bad, as you'll see tonight. There is a final drop date for the course. None of you are going to have to face that, because the way I've structured the course, like I said, I'm not going to put a tremendous amount of grade pressure on you. You're going to be okay if you do the work. Let's see. You do need access to Microsoft Excel for this first course. For the second course, I really rely on SPSS, which is a statistical software package, and the university provides that, so we'll have a mechanism. You don't have to pay for those. We do use an add-in to Excel, and we'll see that a little later tonight, so that you're using a data analysis add-in. It's free, but many of you may not have it on your Excel, and so you'll just add it in. It lets you do some advanced statistical stuff that isn't in the basic Excel program. Excel's fine. It's correct when it does a problem. It's just many of its tools and utilities don't give you the breadth of information or answers that you might want that a statistical processing software might give you. And so we'll see that as we go through. Do you have to bring a laptop? You don't have to bring a laptop. We do in the second course. It's nice to have. In this first course, you don't have to have it, but you could take a few notes as we're doing something on the computer screen, or you can go back and watch it to make sure you can do it on your on your stuff. But if you have one, great, bring it. Glad to have you in here. Except on a Friday night when U of L's playing football and everybody's watching the game on their computer instead of listening to me. I taught for IU. And once I thought, man, the class is quiet. And I got up and walked around, and everybody computers were under the desks. They were all watching the IU basketball while I taught. Now I understand. So, okay, I don't use the Mac sufficiently enough to be an expert in it. So sometimes when we're doing some things, it might be a little different there, and we might have to cue other students to figure out what the right way to get there is. I will say the help desk here is tremendous. I've had a lot of support with them, and they seem to be very nice and work well with students. So if you don't have that phone number, make sure you have it. And if you're struggling with something, Oftentimes you might be using a company's machine and there's a firewall or something of that sort that's creating the problem, and they can usually walk you through fixing that. It's so they're very good. Let's see, what else here? I'll attempt to live to the syllabus as best I can. If I do have to make changes, I promise I'll let you know, and I also promise there'll be changes in your favor. Okay? I won't make changes that punish anybody in any way, shape, or form here. That's not the intent. We grade this MBA grading program. I think it's kind of silly, but if you think about it, we got 52 people. It's hard enough to separate students into several groups of performance, but at U of L, they believe in pluses and minuses, and they give us all this different way, and that's the official grading scale, or what have you. If you're doing good work in this class, you're an A or a B plus student. That's not going to be a problem, so don't worry about the grading pressure here or what have you. But it's not like I'm taking 52 people and I'm trying to break you into, 7 categories? The major professor I mentioned at Drexel, he gave 20 question tests, made me write them, but then he would make them tougher if I didn't write them hard enough or what have you. 20 question tests with 5 possible, A, B, C, D, or E as the answer for each question. Right? So think about that for a second. You got 20 questions with 5 possible answers, which meant that if you randomly checked boxes, you didn't study one iota for the class, you would expect to get what? Your first statistics question. What grade would you expect to get out of the 20? How many would you expect to get right out of the 20?
2 or 3.
A little more than that. 4 of them. You would get 4 of them right because you had 5 possible choices for each one, right? So every 5 questions, you should, by the law of averages, get one of those right. And there's 20 questions, so 5 times 4, you should get 4 of them right. Right? So a person who doesn't do a thing should get a 4. So the very first exam in his class, and all the sections, actually all the stats sections took the same test. There'd be about 350 people in the room, and I was the proctor of that test, and there were all the other folks out there monitoring and all that stuff. 20 question test. He wanted he wanted it to be written in such a way that the average grade on the test that the average was between a 12 and a 16. Right? So he didn't want the mean to be too high on the test, because then he couldn't separate people into the grading categories. And he didn't want it to be too hard or too far on the other scale, and a 4 you ought to get randomly. So you really only had between 4 and 20 to populate the group, right? So if you had a 12 as the average, that means half the students performed under that 12, half performed over that 12, and he could construct a bell curve and put everybody in A, B, C, D, that had D's there, or an F based on that curve. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And we'll see a bell curve here in a couple of weeks, and we'll work with it some. And so that's a pretty tough grading plan, isn't it? Right? Made it very competitive in the class. And I tell you that story because what I found very funny is after the very first tests, we come back in and we have a session with all the students where we review the exam. And he led the session. And he started out by saying, folks, he explained that. There's 20 questions, so forth and so on. If you randomly guess, you should get a 4. And then he'd say, now there were 6 people who scored a 3 or lower on the test. Now think about that. All right, they scored a 3 or lower on the exam. And he would say, Jewish man, and he would say, now, beard looked like Albert Einstein. Now, my advice is if you scored below chance on this test, that means that all the work you've done in this course so far didn't help you one iota, right? It's just random. You randomly did. He said, you don't need to study harder. That's not what I think. You need to change religion. And that's what he would say. And so anyways, I did not adopt that side of him. He was a great professor, but that was his entry post first test explanation. Well, all of you, if you do your work, are going to wind up competing to some extent for these top few categories because I'm not putting a lot of grade pressure on you. I do weight the group work as 50% of your grade, and the individual assignments is 50% of your grade. So do recognize there's 5 assignments. That means that 3 of them are weighted a little less each. I think there's 3 group assignments. So those weightings for that still accounts for half your grade in the course, what you do in the group, and then your individual assignments. What else? This is just information about what we're covering each week, and it'll vary a little bit. We'll just move and find a good stopping point. But we'll tend to cover several things each week. And I think that's it. The rest is university required stuff that's got to be in a syllabus, and that's where we are. Questions for me? All right, so let's think a little bit about statistics. Probably the first thing we ought to do is come to some common terminology so that when I use a phrase or a statement, we're on the same page about what I mean. Then we'll talk a little bit about the types of data that we're going to deal with. I think in most traditional stats class, early on undergrad, that gets about 5 or 10 minutes of focus, and really probably deserves a little more. Yes? Oh, go ahead.
When is homework due?
Oh, so that's a good question. Usually it's due, here's the way it works. I don't give you a deadline for this stuff. So let's say an individual assignment you'll have this week. If you'll get it to me before, say, Saturday morning, let me get this right. No, we're in a Friday night. I'm used to teaching this on a Monday night. I'm sorry. No. Sorry, I apologize. So we're going to have some interesting stuff here. I'm going to say if you get it to me by Wednesday, there's a good possibility I'll be able to have it graded and returned to you before the next class. Okay, but I'm going to be grading this first night 52 assignments, or however many in the class, right? If you give me an hour's notice, it's hard to get it back to you. So if you can get it to me by, say, Wednesday night, I'll do my best to have it turned around for you that quickly. Group assignments a little quicker. There aren't so many. I think that's why one of the reasons we do some of them. So that would work. If something gets in the way, you have a life just like I do, and you end up not getting it to me before Friday night, I'm okay. Okay, there's no penalty or anything like that. But try not to make a habit of that. So 1 or 2 people, sometimes life gets in the way, and they're getting it to me on Friday or on Saturday following day or something like that. We can work through that. Okay?
Another question?
Yep.
Did you want us to come next week with SPSS already?
No. So we won't use SPSS until the second course.
Oh.
Okay? And you don't have to install it. What we'll do is we'll go out to the virtual library of the university, and it'll be right there for us to use. So you'll be able to get it virtually from U of L. Okay? Probably by tonight, though, we will have seen the add-on in Excel, and you can get it loaded because it will help you with the homework for the week. On individual assignments, I'll say this. I recognize you got groups of teams. If you end up wanting to talk about this, that, or the other as a team in an assignment, go right ahead and do that. I realize that happens. But make sure the write-up is your own. Okay, I got to have some trust in you on that, but you should write this stuff up yourself. And probably the biggest complaint that you see in the workplace from students with graduate degrees is they're still struggling to communicate. So the more you can practice writing and things of that sort, the better off we are. So I do ask for some writing, not a lot, but a writing with each assignment so that you're not just thinking numbers, you're thinking about how to communicate about it. And I even ask, and this is important to me, that you think of your audience not as me, right? Your audience is a group of supervisors at your place of work or somewhere who may have had statistics, but some of them had a great stats professor and some of them had an absolute loser and they don't really remember what they did, right? Try to dumb down your answers to explain the concept. And we'll talk about that a little more as we get into it. Yes, sir.
Are we allowed to use AI or?
So AI, well, the question is, are we allowed to use AI? It's in the world today. It's what people use, okay? Be careful with it. Read the results that you're getting from it. Clean it up, right? It should look like you did the work, right? And then don't necessarily accept what it's saying. So one of the homework questions today, there's 6 or 7 in section A. I ask you to explain your thought process in the write-up for why you came to the answer you came to. So I ask you, just explain your thought process. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to know how you're thinking. And I have so many students who say the same thing that I thought, well, I'm gonna use AI. So I put that in there. What type of data is a college GPA? What level of data, right? Now I know why they say it. And AI, in my opinion, is wrong. Okay, they don't give you the right answer for that particular question. So be careful with it. I don't take points off for people for that because, again, it's about how you defend your position. More so, there's an art here. It's not just a science. But I do find AI can be misleading. It's not perfect at this point. So somebody out there has given an answer to that AI is grabbing, and I don't think it's the right answer. And I think I could argue with them and whoop their tail on the argument. And that's what I want you to feel comfortable doing with them. So you can use the AI to some extent, but make it your own. Polish it up, make it your own, right? Okay, so let's talk about a few things and get rolling here on our topics for the night. Usually I write on this board, but the camera's doing a better job of focusing over here. So I'm going to write over here. So when we talk about statistics, just a couple of definitions or what have you. And you'll have access to this video, so decide what you want to write down. But we're going to say the science / art of collecting, describing, and interpreting data. Collecting, describing, and interpreting data. And so I like those 3 words because they kind of break the field down for us. We're going to cover the these first 2 weeks, or what have you, the first 2 pieces, these first 2 weeks. We'll knock these out of the park, or what have you. Collecting data, collecting information. You'll think of it in terms of sampling and things of that sort. There's entire courses on that. We're just going to hit it kind of lightly and move on through it. But that deals with sampling methods and experimental design. Sampling methods and experimental design. And we're not going to do a lot of experimental design. Again, there's entire courses on that sort of thing. Okay, but we will talk about, so often people make conclusions based on sampled data that doesn't reflect at all the conclusion they're making. Here's the classic example of that I find so funny, having been in higher ed now for 40 years, and then having family members who teach K through 12 in Chicago and some other areas, is there's a wonderful, I say that with asterisks, pedagogy for teaching and designing curriculum called Perry's Intellectual Scheme. Has anybody in here ever heard of Perry's Intellectual Scheme? You've been impacted by it. Almost all the preparation of how to lead people to think comes from Perry's work. So Perry said there were 9 levels of knowledge. The lowest level is rote memorization, the kind of thing you did in first grade or what have you, where you just memorize this, memorize that word to learn how to read, memorize that number, so forth and so on. And then you move up through these succeeding levels over time until you reach the pinnacle, which is advanced critical thinking skills. Right? The ability to take something from one area and apply it in a totally new area, and to do so with confidence and correctness and so forth and so on. And Perry developed that scheme, and it's become the backbone of how especially K through 12 works for helping you become educated. The goal is for you to be educated, and we work you through those schema until you get to the top. And everybody is supposed to learn that way. That's how we all learn. Doesn't matter our race, our nationality, our gender, doesn't matter. Perry said, that's how we learn. And that's been the backbone of K through 12 and even higher ed. When most faculty in higher ed, we teach the way our best teachers taught. We don't give a lot of time to that. We're more subject focused, not teaching style focused. But in K through 12, they're very focused on how they teach. Well, here's the real deal. Perry was a Harvard faculty member. Gave him some automatic credence. And so he did his study on 200 freshmen. Oh, by the way, when did Harvard become co-ed? When do you think Harvard became co-ed? How about 1977? Think about that. Okay? Prior to 1977, all the women were admitted to Radcliffe College, not Harvard. And they were allowed, from 1943 on, they were allowed to take classes at Harvard, but they weren't Harvard students, right? So he did his work on a survey and study of 200 Harvard freshman men. That was the study. Did it in the 1960s, studied 200 men. Do you think that a study of 200 men, a sample of 200 men, broadly represents the population of all learners in the world? And yet his work has been used, all right, to form the backbone of how we teach and learn in society today, right? I have it's a New York Times little cartoon. And if I was more technologically focused, I'd have it here and show it to you. It's a picture of a guy sitting across a desk, and he's obviously a faculty member because he has on a coat with patches on the sleeve or what have you. And he's sitting in there, and there's a young lady across the desk from him, and the quote at the bottom says, "Well, that's interesting." He's talking to one of his students. He says, "Well, that's an interesting point. We've tried this experiment on men, mice, monkeys, and rabbits. Maybe we should try it on women," right? Because of how jaded that field has been for such a long time. And here we are, 50% of our student body in the world, female, and the backbone of how we learn is based on a sample that included exactly 0. That's a real problem with sampling methods and experimental design. We should never draw conclusions about the population based on the sample that he used. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about collecting tonight, but we'll get through that and move right on. I want you just to be focused on every time you see a study, ask yourself, is the sample representative of what we're drawing conclusions of? Because that's the number one problem that, not the number one, but that's a major problem that often happens in statistics. Second piece is describing data. And when we describe data, we think about largely we're summarizing data. So the first data that was begging to be summarized was census data. Census data. And so we wanted to describe it, boil it down to its absolute most important points. So we talk mean, median, mode, standard deviation, variance, things of that sort, ways of summarizing data to describe it so that we're not just looking at this data set. And so tonight, we'll focus on describing data, and then next week we'll do, I call it fun with graphs. We'll do the whole week on graphing data. And the nice thing about doing that early on is because as you do papers and things of that sort, you may want to interject some things in there. And I want you to be able to think about how those graphs look so they look correct and they're not misleading or what have you. And we'll look at some misleading graphs. There's quite a few out there. Even today, that people just, I won't say sometimes they intentionally mislead, right? And sometimes it's just ignorance, not thinking it through, or an accident. But we'll talk about that. So we're going to be describing data. So census data comes from a population. When we take a census, we're asking every member of that group, right? We're looking at every possible component of that population. Versus sample data, where if we've done a good job, it's representative of the population. So I had nothing better to do a couple weekends ago, and I'll never own a Mercedes AMG car because they run about $150,000 a pop, but I went and test drove one. They didn't know I couldn't afford it. So I went and had a good time with it and got to lay my ears back a little bit in that car. And one of the things I thought about while I was doing it was there was a study done on high-end performance vehicles, and if they hit a wall going 5 miles an hour, how much damage did it do to the car, right? So you hit my Toyota RAV4 into a wall at 5 miles an average, and it's going to do $1,500 worth of damage. You hit that AMG in a wall doing at 5 miles an hour, and you're looking at a $20,000 bill probably or something, right? And there's data out there for how much that is, right? Well, you wouldn't want to have census data on that, right? The population are Mercedes AMG model cars, right? And if you're Mercedes, you want to run as few as possible into a wall to get an estimate of how much damage is done. Does that make sense? You want to sample, I don't know, 5 cars, right? Take 5 cars in your sample. That would be a, now Car and Driver may want you to sample 15 of them, right? But every one costs 20 grand or so on average. And so you want to have as few as possible, right? And so we'll look at sampling techniques and what's an adequate sample size to be able to draw a conclusion. And a lot of people like to say, well, there's a rule of thumb that if you have 31 or more, you can use the normal curve from a distribution for sample data. Well, I'm sorry, running 31 AMG Mercedes into a wall is not a good idea, right? Let's run 5 and see how they vary and make some conclusions. Maybe we run 5 and throw the high and the low out and average the other 3 to get a value. We'll figure out some way of doing it that's reasonable, but we want to make sure it's representative of the population. Mercedes are made in 2 places in the United States. Anybody? Right near the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, right outside of Birmingham and that area. And then, strangely enough, right outside the University of Clemson in South Carolina in the Greenville area. Right? So 2 of the top football programs, and I'm sure that those plants have a lot of fun with each other, picking on each other. If we're going to run 5 Mercedes into a wall and figure them out, I don't know, perhaps the bumper assemblies for the plant in Tuscaloosa come from one vendor, one supplier, and the bumper assemblies in the one in South Carolina come from another supplier. Would it be a representative sample if all 5 cars came from the Tuscaloosa plant?
No.
Probably wouldn't be, right? So we need a sampling technique that in a perfect world would give each and every member of the population an equal chance of being picked, right? And if that happens, then we have an unbiased sample, which is what we're after, an unbiased sample. So you'll hear me talk about an unbiased sample sometime. That's what I'm talking about, a sample that gives every member of the population a chance to be included. Right? Now, it doesn't mean we don't tweak things a little bit. If I know that 60% of the AMG models are made in Tuscaloosa and 40% are made in Greenville, it's actually a little town outside of Greenville, 40% are made there, and I'm going to wreck 5 AMGs, maybe I want to randomly select 3 from Tuscaloosa and 2 from Greenville. That would mean 60% of my sample is from Tuscaloosa and 40% is from Greenville. And now I've fully accommodated for that problem, right? Now, a purist in statistics would say, yeah, but you haven't given, that's not a truly random sample now. But I have a logic for why I've done it, and that's acceptable. And so we can do that sort of thing. So we'll look at describing data tonight numerically. We'll look at describing data graphically next week. And then we'll move on to the meat of the course, which is interpreting data. And when I say interpreting data, I'm talking about drawing inferences about a population based on samples. Based on a sample. So the whole magic of statistics is to be able to look at samples and to look at those and then be able to draw with some level of confidence a conclusion about the overall population. And what's really kind of magical here that gets lost in basic stats classes is this ability to quantify the risk, right? So if I said to you, the average height of a U of L MBA student is 5 feet 9 inches tall. The mean height is 5 feet 9 inches tall. You get some idea of what the typical MBA student's height is. It does give you some information like that, right? But if I told you the next person to walk in this room, and somebody just walked out and I didn't notice how tall he was or she was, the next person to walk, well, here we go. Right? You have to indulge me just a second. You have to indulge me just a second. Stand here beside me. All right. That's my measurement device for how tall he is, right? What's my best guess before he came in of how tall he was going to be? What's my best guess? 5'9", right? If I know the mean is 5'9", right? There's probably somebody in the program who plays volleyball for U of L who's 6'3" or 6'4". And there's probably somebody else who's 5'3", or what have you, and that's great and fine, but those are extremes, right? The odds are there's a regression. It's an interesting term. Think about that. A regression towards the mean. That's where that term comes from, by the way. Okay, that we're going to see more people near the mean than away from it, typically. Right? It doesn't always happen, but typically that's what we see. Well, what I can do is, with statistics and sampling, I can actually say, I don't know how tall that person's going to be, but I'm 95% confident they're going to be between 5'6" and 6 feet tall. Right? Now think about that statement. Instead of saying the average person is 5'9", the average person is 5'9", that gives you some information, but really the statistical tool that we use that lets us give you some relative amount of risk is much more meaningful. Much more meaningful. I'm going to guess, based on my height, you're a tad bit shorter than the mean. You're 5'8", I don't know.
5'8", 5'9", somewhere.
5'8", 5'9", and I lie about my height too. Not easy. But having said I'm 95% confident, I would catch. Think about that for a minute. If there's 50 of you in this room, and I'm saying something with 95% confidence, then my thinking there is that 95 out of 100 or 47.5 out of 50 folks are going to fall in that range. Okay, that's what I would expect. And so the magic of drawing inferences is that not only we get to use the data in a more precise fashion, we get to quantify the risk associated with whatever we're estimating. Or we're able to say, we may be wrong, and here's how risky that is. And you can't do that when you're dealing with just raw data. Okay. Let's see here. So a couple of other things. So we have populations, we have samples, right? When we're studying something, whatever it is we're studying, that is the variable that we're studying. So when I talk about a variable, and I'm going to run out of space here, so let me do a little erasing. When I talk about a variable, I'm talking about what we're studying. So in my last example there, we're studying the heights of U of L MBA students. That would be my variable. Now think about that. If there are, over the course of multiple classes, at any given time, 200 MBA students, and I want to sample 20 of them, I could go through and randomly select 20 of the 200 and measure their heights. and that would be my sample. Should I use that to predict the heights of MBA students in the United States? Probably shouldn't, okay? Because I didn't give MBA students at, UK a chance to be involved in the study, right? University of Kentucky to be involved. So it may not be a smart thing to do, and yet it happens all the time. We do what's called a convenience sample. I sampled U of L MBA students because I had access to them. And then I applied my results to everybody. Exactly what Perry did. He had access to male freshman students, right? And so he sampled 200 of them to study, and then he erroneously applied his results across all people and how they learn, right? And it isn't even just a gender gap, right? I'll admit it, I'm not Harvard material, right? So I don't know that that study actually reflects how I learned or how I learned when I was young, right? I'd like to think if it's a good school, they made it tougher to get into than I would be able to get into, right? Probably not really true, but I still suspect there's some of that. Certainly Harvard students think it that way, and we'll let them think that. And so that sample may not reflect the population being studied. But the variable understudy in that one was how people learned. The variable understudy in what I'm just talking about now is the height of U of L MBA students. So when I say the word variable, that's what I'm talking about. Oftentimes we're dealing with a data set that has lots of variables. Okay, so your homework assignment, I think, is going to have a data set that's going to have, so that we have the survey of consumer finances. And I think I took a small portion of that survey. We'll look at it here later. It came out, well, they do it every 8 or 10 years. The most recent one's 2022, so that's the data we have. And they survey 6,600 households. It's supposed to be a representative sample from the most recent census data. And they ask them 1,000 questions. And the data set I give you, I've hidden a lot of it so it's not so ridiculous. Might have 15 variables in it, right? But one of the questions is, how much student loans does that family have, right? And so you might want to do a study on the level of student indebtedness in the United States. And so your variable understudy would be that particular variable. You might want to try to relate that to people's income to see if there's a relationship between what annual income is for a family and how much student loan debt they're carrying. Right? There's another question that I included in there. How many hours of TV do they watch a week? Right? I don't know if there's a relationship between that and student loan debt. I don't know. I was more interested in whether or not there was a relationship between that and income level. More hours you watch a TV, the less time you're spending productively working. It probably shows up that way. I don't know. That's that sort of thing. And so you have multiple variables that we can look at. And then when you drill down inside each variable, then that's where we have the data. So you'll see when I talk about data, I'm generally talking about individual observations. So what you'll end up with is an observation number 1, and we'll have the person is 5'7", and we'll have that they had a 19 on their reading score on the ACT, and we'll have that they had a 3.85 high school GPA, and we'll have a bunch of different variables about that student, and we'll have a bunch of students in our data. Student number 1, student number 2, student number 3. And so this is the raw data. Each row represents an observation. So when I talk about an observation, I'm talking about a specific event and the data we collected for each of the variables. And so that's just some common lingo that you'll hear. And of course, I'll get going so quick that I screw that up and you'll have to correct. Okay. And that's it. So let's move into our first sort of meaty topic, and that is levels of data. So when we're dealing with data, there's some data that lends itself to mathematical and statistical manipulation, and there's other data that doesn't lend itself to that very easily. And that tends to get messed up a lot of times. And so I'm going to erase this and start fresh with levels of data. And the first assignment you have in the class is to look at some categories, some explanations, about 6 or 7 of them, where I give you a variable and I ask you to tell me, what level of data do you think it is? What level of data? And so we have a couple of categories that we identify. Really, there's 4 levels, generally accepted 4 levels of data. Okay, there's categorical data, or also known as nominal data. 2 words are interchangeable. There's ordinal data. There's interval data. And finally, there's ratio data. And as you move down the list, the data is more mathematically inclined, okay, as you move down this list. We generally call these 2 categories, and I say generally, you'll see why, qualitative data, and we generally call these 2 categories quantitative data. Quantitative data. The other way I like to think about it, it helps me with it, is if you've counted to get the data, it's likely, more likely to be in these 2 categories here, counted as the way we get it. So I know there are 200 U of L MBA students in the program, and I know that 105 of them are female and 95 are male. How did I get that data? I counted. That's how many are female, that's how many are male. It's counted data. All it is categorical. All I can do is put it in a category, male and female, right? Versus quantitative data, which is usually gotten by measuring data, or measuring what you. So when I move to people's heights, how do I get heights? I have to measure to get those heights. I don't count things, I measure to get them. And so that becomes those higher order of data, or what have you. So let's look at each of these categories a little bit. The lowest level of data, still important, but just the lowest level is nominal or categorical. All we can do is put it in a category, right? Gender, race, political affiliation, right? So Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, Socialist Party, or other, or whatever I want to categorize that. A lot of times in surveys, there's yes-no questions, right? So yes, no, and a question. You may have a personal opinion about the question, and you might think yes is a better answer than no, but you're still counting how many people said yes and how many people said no. Are you on financial aid? Right? That would be a question we might ask an undergraduate student. Are you on financial aid? We would count our results for that. Okay. When we count data like this, we shouldn't calculate an average for it. We shouldn't be calculating means and things with those. Most people get that and don't do it, right? There's a saying in statistics, I don't want to offend anybody, but the average person in the world has 1 breast and 1 testicle. Okay? That is calculating nominal data when you do that. Okay? We're calculating an average on something we shouldn't be calculating. Doesn't mean anything, right? All we can do is count males and females. Ordinal data is the second level. And it's an interesting, I almost want to call it a floating sort of category. It can move into the quantitative in some circumstances. But in ordinal data, it's still a category, but we can rank the categories. There is a higher and a lower ranking, right? So until about 20, 25 years ago, it didn't really exist that much, but the Amazon star system, right? So you rate on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, right? And so I'm very, I call it Amazon's, it's others too, but Amazon kind of gets the credit for the whole shebang there, I guess. You know, I'm telling my wife, hey, I found this Mexican restaurant, and it got 4.6 stars, right? And for some reason, I think that that's better than the Mexican restaurant that's a little further away that has 4.5 stars. Right? Now, what I didn't tell her was that 6 people have ranked this one, and 6,000 people have ranked that one. So where do people prefer to go? Right? So I'm not giving the full picture when I do it. I'm making a mistake when I do it, but I'm trying to convince her to go to this particular restaurant, so I give her the best information. If I want her to go to the 4.5 one, I say, I think it's a more popular restaurant here. Don't worry about the stars. It's got 6,000 reviews. Right? That tells me people are packing the place. So anyways, I can mislead with that information, but it is ranked data. The most famous scale for that data is called the Likert scale. A Likert scale. And you've seen it a lot. You may not have ever heard it called that name. What it basically is it's usually a 5-point scale. All right? I strongly agree, I agree, I'm neutral, I disagree, or I strongly disagree. Right? So think about that. We've all seen surveys probably where they had us rate something from strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. That's a 5-point Likert scale. Would you agree, no pun intended, that somebody who says they strongly agree with the position, right? I think it was wrong for the appellate judge to decide to throw out Donald Trump's conviction on, the conviction that he got in New York. And we asked people, right? Would you agree that somebody who strongly agrees with that statement has one opinion and somebody who's neutral on it has another? Probably. There's probably a difference between their vested interests in that thing. Some of you are very neutral. You care less, go on with life, or what have you. But some of you would have a real political opinion, perhaps, about that. Notice the difference here, though, between each category. We might say there's a difference between each ranking, but it's not equal distance. So the difference between somebody who says they strongly agree with that judge's ruling and agree, there's a difference between those two categories. It's hard to quantify that difference, right? Whereas the difference between agree and neutral might be a different amount, right? Another example, and I'll throw it out here. How about a grading scale in A, B, C, D, or F? Now, I've got it reverse, right? But would you agree that's ordinal? Right off the top, we're putting people in classifications, and an A should be better than a B, should be better than a C, right? So that could be ordinal data, conceivably, right? And is the difference between an A and a B the same as the difference between a B and a C? Think about that for a minute. Some of you might argue, yes, it's equal interval. The difference is the same because, let's say in this class, I base it on a 90 to 100 is an A, and an 80 to a 90 is a B, and a 70 to an 80 is a C. So you say, oh, yes, That's an equal interval. So I'm going to call that interval. I'm going to. It's ordinal, but it also has an equal interval between the orders. Right? It moves down a little bit. Some of you might say no, because it's the difference between an A and a B is not the same as the difference between a B and a C. Right? You're going to have to get an A. You're going to have to really do great work. Right? The difference between a B and a C is a little more subtle, perhaps, depending on how the person grades. I'm not saying I grade that way. I'm just saying that's. So where it falls, I'm not sure. Yes, question.
So like if you change it to like an A plus, B plus, would that change it up a little bit?
Well, so that's a good question. You end up with more categories, right? Makes it harder to put people in the right category, right? Who makes me the perfect person to say you're an A student or a B student, right? And now you're expecting me to decide, oh no, I'm good enough that I can subtly decide that you're a B minus or a B plus student, right? And are my testing instruments good enough to actually figure that out?
Well, I was thinking about like strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree and disagree. Like, I mean, of course, I'm hypothetically speaking.
Yeah. So the U of L does this. I think they still do it. So you all will be asked at the end of the course to do an evaluation of me, right? And I'm going to get a score, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5. And I'm going to get I do pretty good. I'll take it. I do like a 4.4. I'll take that, okay? I chuckle at it, right? Because there's 5 possible, well, first of all, there's maybe 20 questions. And one of them was the textbook in the class was appropriate for the material taught, right? What are you going to give me for that? Well, he said 5. So my textbook was perfect for the material taught. I didn't assign a textbook. Half of you are going to give me a 0 or a 1 because you didn't even have a book in the class. And it factors into my score. Right? So I got a 4.4, but deep down I know if they'd asked the question smartly, I might have got a 4.8 or something. They're asking they shouldn't rate me on whether or not you liked the textbook. And yet that's in there. Right? And so there's issues there with the underlying, what drives the underlying data. And we want to be able to question that. All right. So ordinal data, generally speaking, we say you shouldn't take the average of it because the intervals aren't the same. Right? But we do it. Amazon has a 5-star system, and they calculate an average for you, 4.6 stars. Right? It's ordinal data, and they're violating the rule. But it does make some sense. But what I want you to be able to do is recognize the difference between a 4.6 and a 4.8 is not that big a deal. Right? And people, when they rate those star systems, it brings out the extremes. Right? So if you had a wonderful experience, you might take the effort to go out there and give it 5 stars. If you had a terrible experience, you might really want to make the effort to go out and give it 1 star and explain why. Right? The typical person can't be bothered. Okay, and whether they had a 2 or a 3 or a 4-star moment with that, it never gets really told effectively because we're not going to take our time to do that. Right? So it's probably somewhat misleading information, especially when the sample size is really small. So, and I do it for a living, and I find myself thinking, oh, there's a restaurant with 4.8. And then at the last second, I realize, oh, only 32 people have actually rated that place. Right? And probably 18 of them were family members of the owner of the business, right? And so I haven't. If there were 3,000, now I have a little more faith in the results. So we want to be critical of that. Okay. So we're going to finish the data, and we'll take a break here. So that's the Likert scale. Let's see. Asking a child what grade they're in. I'm in 3rd grade. I'm in 4th grade. I'm in 5th grade. Is it smart to say the average child in this study was in such and such a grade? Probably not, okay? Quality ranking of service levels, I've mentioned that. That's the STAR system. So we tend to average this data a lot of times, but it's risky. Go ahead, yeah.
So just to clarify, like grades, like child grades, like 4th, 5th grade, that's kind of ordinal. Or is that ordinal?
So some of these areas I'm going to let you think it through. Your thought process is as important as anything, right? If I've done a study of first, second, and third graders, and that's who I've studied in my population, and I wind up telling you, what's better to say the average student was in second grade? Or would I be better to say there were 500 students in the study, 100 of them were first graders, 200 of them were second graders, and 200 of them were third graders? What is more telling to you? That second explanation, the count is more meaningful than the calculation. That's probably ordinal data, right? If the intervals are the same, right, then I can probably calculate an average. And that's what we get to when we hit this interval data here. Let's see. So technically, we shouldn't be averaging those things. Let me go to GPA for just a second. I'll tell my story here. I graduated from WKU, and it was the world's worst commencement program I've ever been to, of any place I've ever been to. They did it 1 year, and it was so upsetting, they never did it again. The president, I guess, was unwilling to shake everybody's hand who graduated. So what they did was, we were all sitting out there in the crowd, and instead of having us come across the stage, they had us stand in our places. And here's how they did it. Well, all students graduating from the College of Arts and Sciences who are graduating with honors, please stand. And we were sitting by college, and about 10% of the group stood up in that section. And then they said, well, everybody else graduating in the College of Arts and Sciences, please stand. Right? And so they had that group. And they were all graduates who graduate with honor in the College of Business, please stand. And I don't know, 15% of the students stood up. And then they said, well, all other students graduating with honors are graduating in the College of Business, please stand. So now we're standing. Then they go, well, all students who graduated with honors in the College of Education, please stand. And like 3 remained seated. Okay, because everybody in the College of Education graduated with honors, right? Because their grading scales are different than other students, right? Now, the reason they never did it again is the whole rest of the graduating class turned and booed the College of Education because it was embarrassing to see that happen. And so it was a painfully visible situation that you have different grading scales and expectations, right? Now, if you're, and I'm not trying to pick on you, if you came through a College of Education, that's great. I have a degree from one of those. Fine, I learned a lot in it because I put a lot into it. And my GPA reflects that it came from a College of Education or what have you. Where was I going with that? That GPA, would you want me to compare admission to, say, a medical school? Is it comparable to compare that GPA with the GPA of somebody who graduated in the College of Arts and Sciences, where only 10% of the people graduate with honors? What do you think? And yet we tend to think GPAs are comparable, right? A 3.8 means something, and that's a better student than a 3.2 student. Yeah, there's other factors involved, right? There's other factors, and we tend to forget that. So we have to be careful. All right, interval data. Interval data is kind of a classification that often gets lost in the shuffle. They get kind of combined here. But you do have data where there is an equal interval between the numbers, but there's no true zero. There's no true zero. So you explain the interval section, interval type data, by comparing it to the highest level of data, which is the ratio data. So let me talk ratio before I do interval. Ratio data is where you can do a calculation quite simply and say that this is twice as much as that. That would be a ratio, right? I'm calculating a ratio when I do it. So when I say that somebody is 210 pounds and somebody else is 105 pounds in terms of their weight, can I say that person 1 is 2 times the size of person 2 or 2 times the weight of person 2? I can, right? There's a true zero there that allows me to make that calculation, right? It's almost true in everything we study in business when it comes to dollars. So one of the things that hangs people up is they think, oh, there has to be an absolute zero. You can't go below it, right? If I'm looking at net worth of people in that survey of consumer finances, and it's 6,600 people, and there's somebody in that study who's worth like $800 million or something, right? You could probably figure out who it is. Somebody really wealthy, their family was included in that survey. And there's somebody else worth a fourth of that. I could say this person has 4 times the net worth of that person. It's ratio data. I can do that math. Now, could you have a negative net worth? In fact, about 30% of the U.S. population has a negative net worth. Give me a home loan, and the next thing you know, I may be doing fine financially, but I have a negative net worth. So you can have negative numbers, but it's true on the other side as well. If you're worth negative $100,000, are you is your net worth twice as low as a person who has a negative $50,000 net worth?
No.
Well, no, it is. It is. It's double. It's double the. You can do that ratio on either side of the zero, is what I'm getting at. Is it works on either side. So it doesn't mean that the scale stops at zero necessarily, but it does mean you can use that scale to be able to make those kind of calculations. Now compare it to the following. Today it is 80 degrees outside, right? Tomorrow, the high is 40 degrees. That means tomorrow is going to be twice as cold, or today was twice as hot as it's going to be tomorrow. That makes sense? Or to simplify that a little bit, if I'm up in Vermont, today's high is 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow's high is 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That means tomorrow it'll be 2 times hotter in Vermont than it was today. Right? There's no absolute zero in the Fahrenheit scale. You can't do that calculation that way. You can't compare them that way. So you have equal interval. The difference between 32 degrees and 33 degrees is the same as the difference between 80 and 81 degrees. A degree is a degree, and it has there's a way they calculate it, and it's consistent across the scale. But you can't do ratio calculations with it. Anybody in here take the GMAT test? Took the GMAT test, right? GMAT test, if you took the ACT test, or you took if you took a basic IQ test, it's all the same. There's no absolute zero in those. The worst you can do on the GMAT, General Management Aptitude Test, used to be required for getting into MBA programs and things of that sort across the country. The worst you can do is a 400. The highest you can do is an 800, I think. I'm pretty sure that's accurate still. I haven't checked it this year to see if they've changed it or something. If you scored a 600 and somebody else scored a 400, you can't do a mathematically ratio calculation on that to say relatively how much better one person did than another. You can't do that sort of thing. Now, it's an equal interval. A point is a point is a point. Yes, sir.
Would a vision test also fall into that category?
So I've not thought about a vision test, right? So that's it.
Blind is 0.
So I'm going to argue that you hit blindness well before you get to 0, right? Right. So let's think about another one in the healthcare has a lot of these sort of scales, right? So you get your blood pressure taken. My suspicion is you're dead long before your BP is 0. Anybody here in medical school? Usually we have 1 or 2. Yeah, okay. So it's I don't know where it stops, but there's 2 levels of what systolic and whatever, I don't know. Okay. I was a pre-med major for 3 weeks or something in that sort, and went to what my father called dumb man's math, which was funny. Once I got my first job, he realized, maybe it's not. Area. So anyways, so I would use that one. I'm not sure what's this, do we know what the bottom point is? You have 20/20 vision, right? And I've heard of 2016 and 2030 or what have you. I don't know if I'd have to look it up. The difference between the points is equal interval. Probably is, and it probably doesn't have a true 0, in which case you're right, you're dealing with interval data. Okay? Now the nice thing is you can still calculate an average for that. You can calculate a mean, right? He has one eye at this level and an eye at that level, and here's the average for those. or what have you. You can do that, but you can't do ratio stuff. You can't say he sees twice as good as that person does based on that scale. That's where you get into that situation. So so temperatures. Almost all standardized tests are interval data, but you can still mathematically manipulate them. You just can't take ratios with them. And oftentimes you find you have to look that scale up to see. You might be surprised by some of the scales that you thought, that you thought were that way. Let's see. Ratio data, almost anything you measure that you can do that kind of quick ratio. Twice as much wealth. The cost is twice as much. Twice as much spent on advertising. So weighing twice as much. Height, inches of height or whatever, centimeters. So height, weight, age, salary, profit, net worth. We have a lot of ratio data out there. And it's the strongest data. We can do the most with it. Right? So with that, let's take a break. And we'll come back and hit the second part of the class. And I'll go a little faster on the other topics. But I wanted to take my time and introduce the course. So let's come back. I'm a little late getting us out of here. Let's come back at 20 till. 20 till.
I was confused with this.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to answer that for you. You don't have no. Okay. I think you're awesome. You misheard Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah. That coffee. You look for me. Yeah. I do my day job. Good deal. Good. Yep. And your role there is okay. Right.
Order drinks with our food.
Oh yeah. For public bank. They did. Okay. Yeah, that's the hard part. Yeah. Give up your life for a while. I know why I can't right now. None of the full-time people. I'm in there. They love me. Usually I have Monday through Thursday. Friday night, nobody wants to do it.
Oh yeah, you like it? Yeah.
Good, okay, good. Join our foundation. Of course, you know you are the center part of it. We haven't announced it. So all the different states, their own Broadway, we're going to have, it's going to be the largest.
Oh no.
Oh, it's actually.
Is it hot in there?
Not water.
They don't wear you out.
It's like on the
Don't want to work. Building a parking lot. And there's up on Broadway.
In my drive.
Yeah. The Republic's going to play a big part in the name. I think your calculus.
Are your prices?
Everybody coming from the south.
I had concrete.
The value,
So we had concrete labor.
we're going to make it look Wait for me? Yes, sir.
I ordered some shit.
So you're going to email all of them?
First of all,
My email account?
I
And I'll put them on.
like should be
Oh, read it?
I'm not even
So you'll have to copy.
like it's
Well, and so that would be great. I'll talk to you about
brought in somebody's to our HR skill. So like they like are screening for us. What was that? What's the date of that? So we hired in. So I'm just talking to them today. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And they're like, wow, you did this
Usually it's like, if they're there, you're
I can't help but notice Mark Martin. So I lived in St. Clark. Knew the family. Lived next door to the home in the back house. And where the front door was, he had embedded in the concrete, had two finishing flags. So we would just walk over and kind of look at those flags. Mark walked over. A lot of boards you got to as one of the you went there to drive one of the cars. Great. Great. Oh, and he was the most famous graduate in college. I know his father was Martin, and so you'll see the name on the truck. So Dad died, and there you go. When those everybody.
Oh yeah, I literally have a traffic count here.
So, normally I just kind of wait.
You can't gamble.
Game board.
Yeah, if you hear anything about going,
And then they can tell you like,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I got Gen
I'm about to say.
I got Gen T.
You'll be
So you can start.
I'm
No, I get street.
Oh, you got the rookie.
in the mid-90s.
It had to fit.
yeah, if they do like a background. They qualify for like
So yes,
Early about that.
don't feel any pressure
they
for that. That'll take care of it. Your name is Nate?
Everyone else is
That makes more sense. They got dropped.
First assignment for week 1. We haven't covered it yet. So, I think almost everybody's back, so we'll go ahead and
Yeah, I bet all that steez that
we'll go ahead and get rolling. Got a minute.
no, it was the Giants. It's hard.
Go ahead, almost. We're gonna go ahead. Problem. Okay. I'm going to have to pick up the pace just a little bit to get through tonight's material. I tend to get rolling and start telling stories and fall behind a little bit. So we'll pick it back up here and we'll get her done. The one thing I didn't mention about data classifications, the data levels, is these two phrases you'll see a lot: discrete and continuous variables. So you'll see that, and I don't know why those terms are used so much because they tend to confuse people. Discrete generally has to do with counting something. You can't have, versus continuous, you can always subdivide the variable. So if we're talking, just getting started, we're fine. So if you're talking somebody's weight, depending on how accurately I'm able to measure that weight, I can keep subdividing that. It could be pounds, it could be tenths of pounds, it could be ounces, so forth and so on, right? Nowadays, when I do a stock trade, right, they're carrying it out to 4 decimal places on the cost, not just pennies, not dollars, pennies, but they're going out 4 decimal places on that transaction or what have you. And so that's continuous data, meaning if you have a better measurement device, you can further subdivide it, versus a count, discrete data, where I'm just counting something, okay? Number of Republicans. I can't have 1.5 Republicans, right? I got 1 in the study, or I got 10 in the study, or I got 12 in the study, but I can't have 11.5. Okay, so that's discrete data. So you'll see that sometimes, and actually in the homework for each of the things I asked you to look at, I do want you to think about, is that discrete or is that continuous? Now be careful here. Just because I said typically that's counted doesn't mean universally that it's in these 2 categories of data. So it's kind of a different way of classifying data, right? But generally, if you're measuring something, it's going to be continuous data, because if you have a better measurement tool, you can further subdivide it, versus discrete, which is undivisible. It's more of a count. So I didn't bring that point up. I wanted to make sure I covered that before I moved on. Because I do ask you to tell me whether something is discrete or continuous. Okay, let's move into sampling a little bit and make pretty short order of this topic because this isn't a course in sampling. So if you were earning a master's degree in statistical methods or in data analytics, you would probably have a course that dealt with nothing but sampling. I just want to hit it at a high level because it is the source of a lot of problems where people are drawing conclusions based on bad sampling techniques. And so let's talk about those sampling techniques. Here's the goal. The goal is to have an unbiased sample. That's the gold standard for sampling. And an unbiased sample is where each member of the population has the equal opportunity to be included in the sample. That's the goal. Right? And so that's where the term random sampling comes from. A random sample is the gold standard. Because if we can follow a random sampling technique, then every member of the population had a chance to be in the study. And that's great. Now, universally, it's not always able to happen. Oftentimes, we don't even know the full population. Right? So we're studying, I'll make something up here. We're studying how many legs frogs have, right? Well, we can't include an equal opportunity for every frog in the world to be included in the sample, right? We can't even get to that point. We have to make some leaps, unintended, of faith there with that sampling. So we can't always hit that gold standard, but that is the gold standard, right? We're interested in a sample size that's large enough that we have some faith that it, I don't want to say mirrors, but that it represents the sample, represents the population fairly. Okay? It wouldn't be smart if I'm looking at the average height of MBA students here at U of L. That's a pretty easy thing to get a grip on, to get a handle of, for me to sample 3 people and take their average and say that's reasonable, that's what we'll use. Okay, that's what we'll use. But we have a whole field out there in real estate of the appraisal field where when you're going to go buy a property, it's not uncommon to get 3 appraisals, right, and take the mean of the 3, right? Is that a good sampling technique? Probably not. Anybody in here an appraiser? No? What a racket that field is, right? If you're not in here, I want to get in an argument with you or what have you, but I have a relative who was an appraiser. There's a lot of games played in that field. So, but 3 properties and taking the average, that's probably not a representative sample to be determining the value of a property with. So sample size matters, right? If it's a truly random sample, we say it's unbiased. And that's what we want, an unbiased sample. There's no bias in it. As soon as we move away from random sampling, we run the risk of introducing bias. So we have to really think about it as we do it. I used an example a few minutes ago about the Mercedes AMG, and I said 60% of them are made in Tuscaloosa, 40% in South Carolina, and we design our sample so that 60% of the cars come from Tuscaloosa and 40% from South Carolina. There's a rational reason for doing that, and we can probably get away with a sample that isn't purely unbiased, right? In an unbiased sample, every single car would have an equal chance. That means we're just as likely to have more cars from South Carolina than from Tuscaloosa or vice versa in the sample if they all had an equal chance. But we know from a manufacturing standpoint, more are made in Tuscaloosa, so we can defend an adjustment to the sample. Oftentimes, the adjustments that are made are indefensible. You can't do that. But I think sometimes you can tweak it and your sample can be actually stronger. Okay? Let's see. The most common mistake is we do what I call, and I've seen it called this before, convenience sampling. And Convenience, I before E except after C. I don't know, convenience, I don't remember. If I don't have it right, I'm sorry. Convenience sampling, probably the most common mistake made. Right, I want to estimate the height of U of L MBA students, but I'm lazy, there's 200 of them, but I randomly sampled 10 of you in this class. Why? It's convenient, right? And you have to let me measure you because you're going to get a grade in the class if you don't. So I own that opportunity. So I'm going to take advantage of it. I don't have to chase you down to get it, right? So that's a common form of sampling, but it has some inherent risk. I'm making the leap that the spread of heights in this class is comparable to the spread of heights in the entire MBA program. And that may or may not be true, right? Friday night is a travel night for a lot of U of L athletics because they're going to participate on Saturday. So there may be people who aren't in this class, but in another class as a result of that, or something of that sort. And if the assumption is that we're talking basketball, volleyball, some other sports, I may be missing some taller folks from my sample, right, who are in the graduate program. I don't know. It's possible. So I have to be careful. So convenience sampling can be a real problem, right? I sample 100 students from my college and ask them preferences on a variety of items such as, who's your favorite cell phone carrier, right? What type of car do you prefer, gas, electric, or hybrid? What's your favorite type of restaurant? And then I use that data to make a conclusion about community college students throughout Kentucky. Very common sort of thing. So I have people who are routinely earning their doctorate degree. They're doing a statistical research of some sort, and they contact the college, and they want permission to pull data from us, and they want to use that data to make judgments about community college students across the U.S. And they have dissertation committees that have approved this as part of their research, as if my college accurately reflects community college students across the country, and I can assure you it doesn't, right? And yet that mistake is made all the time, right? If I do a study, if they sample 100 students from Jefferson Community and Technical College, they're probably safe at drawing conclusions about all the students at Jefferson. They're certainly not safe at drawing conclusions about students at, the Dearborn, Michigan Community College. But that doesn't stop them. They'll do it anyways. Yes?
So basically, the convenience sample is like not all the way accurate, or it can be.
When you say not all, it's unscientific.
It's like.
Yeah, right. And they'll oftentimes they'll try to give it a level of how it looks scientific, because instead of just I might randomly sample 10 people from this class, right? But when I'm finished, I'm extrapolating my results to all the students' heights, when I should only be using 10 of you in here to estimate for this class. You were the population that formed the sample. My son at U Chicago, he made a living. He paid all his expenses outside by being a professional volunteer for studies being done. Okay, because that's the School of Economics, and they do all these studies, and there's all the time cash awards to students who are willing to go spend 2 hours. One person's in one room, one's in another, and they're asked a question, and they're told every time they give a wrong answer, a buzzer's going to go off, and the person in the other room's going to get shocked. Right? And so they ask him a question or what have you, he gets it wrong, and you hear somebody in the next room over screaming. Right? And they're doing some sort of psychological study on things. Right? It's a grad student whose job over there is when the light goes on screen. Right? And that's what and he made a living being a part of those studies. And I mean, when I say made a living, 2 or 3 times a week, and he'd get paid a couple $100 for each study he did. Right? It was a nice little living, or what have you. They were taking University of Chicago undergraduates, doing a study, and some of them were winning Nobel Prizes, or what have you, for a lot of their research, when it wasn't an accurately reflective sample of the typical person. During his downtime, he's in a class and he's studying economics, which is a study of making rational choices in an unrational world. right? He probably had an advantage on some of those studies and what was going on from the typical person going into, if you had randomly sampled all over. It didn't stop them. It was a convenient sample. We had money to burn, and we can pay that person right there to do it, so that's our sample. You have a question?
I'm just wanting to make sure I understand, the term convenience sample, are we using that literally, like as in there's a motive there?
Well, I mean, the motive is it's easier. It's an easier way of getting it. So it's convenient.
But who says exactly when it's easier and when it's?
Well, so the designer who's setting up the experiment makes a conscious decision that I'm going. So let's say we're going to look at how this next election coming up, whether people are going to favor at this point in time Democrats or Republicans. And they're going to do a polling of people in the United States, right? Now I'm going to stretch this to an absurd level here. And so we want to poll 1,000 people, and we want to ask them their preference in the upcoming election. And so I can't remember the name of the college up north that does a lot of this sort of stuff, but there's an institution that does a lot of this. So they call randomly, they have lists of everybody's cell phone numbers across the United States, and they randomly sample from this database 1,000 phone numbers to call. And they call these people, and they ask them this question, along with a bunch of others. And they use it to predict what's going on, the national sentiment on something. Is that a representative sample of the population?
No. No,
Why not?
because you're just taking, they have over 300 million population, and you're just taking 1,000.
Well, you're picking 1,000, that's correct.
That does not.
Taking them from the database.
Yeah, now, I can mathematically show you, and we won't do it here, but because we're not about formulas so much in this course, but I can actually show you that if you tell me how precise you want me to be in my estimate, I can do a mathematical calculation and tell you exactly how many we need to sample. I can do that. It will work. If you want to be plus or minus 3 percentage points from accurate, you need to sample about 1,300 people. And I can show you that mathematically. Where I thought you were heading, with this, was that there's 300 million people in the United States. Did each and every one of them have an equal chance of being a part of that sample?
No.
Because they don't all own a cell phone. We're missing a lot of people who don't have access to a cell phone, right? And so we're missing the homeless maybe, or we're missing a group that way. Or the flip side of that is you might say, well, that one might be a group of people who would vote one way. On the other extreme, I'm a busy person. You call my cell phone and I don't recognize the number, I don't have time to deal with you. I'm not answering, right? So they get all these no answers, right? All they really have sampled are 1,000 people willing to answer their cell phone.
Or if they give a false impression.
So it might give you a false impression. So you have to really make a leap to sort of say that is a representative sample of the U.S. population as a whole. Plus, there's another problem here. I don't care what most people in the United States think about the next election. I want to know what likely voters are going to do. In other words, if you're not voting, I don't care if I don't want you in the sample if you're not voting. I want to figure out how we get a hold of likely voters. So you'll now hear studies that just started in the last 10 to 20 years where they talk about a poll of likely voters. So the first question they'll ask when they get on there is, how likely are you to vote in the next election? And they'll give them choices. And depending on their answer, that'll include whether or not their other answers are even included. They're trying to get at a better estimate of the population, right? But it's convenient to have cell phone numbers and get that group. Used to, before cell phones, we did it with phone books, right? And so they'd use a phone book. Well, a lot of people were unlisted. A lot of people didn't have a phone, right? If you want to be perfect, you pick 1,000 people and you send people out all across the country to find that person, whatever it takes, and you include them in the thing. That's not convenient. So we have to figure out a way to get as close as we can.
Well, over the years, though, politicians, their polls have been extremely wrong. Just because they keep picking the same samples or the same populations and just picking smaller populations. And so you tend to have those skewed.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And so even if Fox News or CNN is doing an extremely fair poll, Let's say their design for their poll is as unbiased as possible. And you answer the phone, or the person comes to your door and they say, hello, I'm from CNN and I'm taking a survey. What have they just done? They have just biased the results. Because people look at CNN and they say, oh, they're this direction. So now when I answer this question, I need to recognize I don't want to offend that person. I'm going to answer it a certain way. Right? And so just by saying who they are, they may have biased their results. And you have a lot of that. They'll report, and they've done everything right except their very first introduction to the conversation. They've tipped what they want you to say by telling you where they're from. Right? Happens routinely. And I'm not saying they do it on purpose. Right? They think, I'm from CNN, you got to trust me. Or I'm from Fox News, you got to trust me. Well, that's not how it works. Right? So we have to be careful with convenience sampling. Another form of sampling is known as systematic sampling. Systematic sampling. And depending on how this is designed, it can work very well. Okay? You split the population into groups and then select every so many items from that group. Right? So I want to know what proportion of people in the United States have been diagnosed with cancer. I'm going to do a study, and I want to know a simple question, or the impact of cancer on families in the United States. So I try to figure out a way to sample where I can ask the person I'm sampling whether anybody in their immediate family has had an incident of cancer. That's the question I want to ask, right? Now, I need to be careful because if I'm trying to draw conclusions about the entire United States, I don't want to find out that 40% of my survey was in the Rust Belt of Ohio, or the Ohio Valley, or what have you. Because we know, because of the industrial work that's done in the Ohio Valley, there are more incidents of cancer in the Ohio Valley representative than across the entire United States. Right? So I want to get a fair plot of that. So maybe rather than pure random sampling, I divide the country up into regions. And I'm going to ask 1,000 people in the survey, and so I ask 200 from the Northeast, and 200 from the Southeast, and 200 from the Midwest, and 200 from the Far West, to where I get 1,000 folks from the geographic regions around the country, right? Does that make some sense as a way of maybe systematically sampling? To make sure I don't accidentally introduce bias, right? I need to be able to rationally defend what I've done, but that happens. That type of survey can be designed and is designed. We're not going to design it in this class. Another one is to combine convenience sampling with that, right? So I've got 5 researchers who are helping me with this project. We're going to fan out across the United States and do a survey. And so what I do is I pick regions, zip code, randomly sample 6 zip codes across the United States. And I actually position them, make sure they're randomly sampled each from each geographic region. And then I sample, since there's 6, I sample about 150 people from within each zip code. That way my researcher takes one flight, they land in San Francisco, they drive to Sacramento, and they go find the 150 people that they're supposed to ask the question of, as opposed to sending them all across the far west to meet with these 150 people. Make some sense? Right? So it's convenient, but I got to that convenience through a systematic process. Right? Now, is it purely an unbiased sample? No, it's not. Because I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and they didn't use my zip code. I didn't have a chance to get in that study. I was never even considered for inclusion. They picked other areas. I never had a chance to get in it. So it's not truly unbiased, but you may be able to defend it. Right? You just have to think about the logic behind what was done there. My grandfather was an inspector for orange groves growing up, and outside of season he did peaches, and then he did canned goods for the FDA. Yes, question?
Is systematic sampling the same thing as cluster sampling?
So that's another one that I was going to bring up. I'm sort of getting into that area when I talk about, but cluster, so we'll get to that one in just a minute. So that's good. I've got it in here. But back to systematic for just a second, though. So his job was to go into food processing plants, canneries, and inspect the processes. And he told this story. He was a great guy. He told this story at Thanksgiving once about how he went into this plant in Dothan, Alabama, that was packaging spinach, Del Monte spinach. I shouldn't give the brand name, but it was Del Monte spinach. So he went in there, and the doors into the plant area have these windows in the doors so that when you're walking through them, you don't hit somebody. You can look out and not run over somebody. And so he's standing outside and he's looking in. This is Dothan, Alabama. This is the 1960s, 1970s. I was a little kid when he told the story. And there's a woman there on the assembly line or the filling line, and her job, the machine in front of her is dropping in the product, and the cans are coming down the line, and she's got a rag there, and if something spills, her job is to take that little rag and wipe the can off as it goes by every now and then. The quality control thing or the actual sealing process or something. And that's her job, and she's supposed to do that. And she's a little old lady, and she's sitting on this chair, and she's rocking back and forth. It's Alabama. You got Todd rocking around, and she's chewing that tobacco, and every fourth rock, pooh, she spits a little in one of those cans. Right? So every fourth rock, every 100 can coming down the assembly line or so, she is adding some spice to the spinach. Right? He said, true story. I didn't relate it until later on in life after I'd taken some stat classes where I realized that's a situation where systematic sampling could get you in trouble. If you're the quality control person for that plant and you're sampling every 200th can, depending on the pattern of her spitting, you may never sample one of the cans that she's spitting in, right? Because they never line up with how the selection's happening. So there's a situation where systematic sampling could result in a problem. Quality control isn't going to catch the problem, right? And so anyway, so next time you have spinach, think about that, or what have you. Another one is stratified sampling. Okay, so things are following party lines. Stratified. Okay, and so we know that in Kentucky nowadays, there's been a big sea change, that 60% of eligible and likely voters are Republican and 40% are Democrat. So when we set up a sample, rather than randomly sample across Kentucky, we make sure, if we're going to ask political questions, we may want to make sure that we're asking the same proportion of Democrats and Republicans. We're stratifying our sample before we go seek answers because we are interested in political affiliation sort of responses associated with what we're studying. So we can do that and talk about that. Cluster sampling, that's often used for convenience to save money. Right? So cluster sampling is typically convenience sampling disguised. Okay? So we want to get this unbiased sample, but we don't have the resources to truly go chase down the population. So if we can cluster them in some way. So we want to know I don't know, how many trees are in the typical yard in Jefferson County, Kentucky. Because we're all big about trees here and warming and things of that sort. And the average home has X number of trees. We want to kind of figure that out. Too hard to go count the entire population. We're going to sample. So we got 32 zip codes. So we randomly select 6 of them. And within each zip code, we select 10 houses. And we send people out to go count the trees in those houses. Right? That's a cluster sampling example. Does it run some risk? More so than an unbiased sample? Probably does. Right? Are we likely to do it? Something like that? Yes, because we just don't have the resources to go everywhere and chase them. It would take too long. So that's what. So I consider cluster sampling kind of a subset of convenience sampling. And then there's one more I want to hit before we move on that you see a lot, and they don't always admit that they're doing it, and that's judgmental sampling. Judgmental sampling. okay, where we're just using our judgment and we're trying to get an expert's opinion. So, and I'll pick you up in just a second. Let me give this example real quick. So my example of that's going to be the typical person probably doesn't understand the impacts of the tariff proposals that Trump administration has made, and we've seen the market going back and forth, and we want to get some insight as to what people think are going to happen in terms of the long-term impact of Trump's tariff policy. Not the short-term impacts, but the long-term impacts of Trump's tariff policy. So we know that we sort of think economists have a better grasp on that impact than others, right? And so we identify 20 leading economists that we go sample and ask them their opinion of the long-term impact of those. And then we report it as if it's the U.S. view, the general public's view. Or we report it as if it's the economist's view, right? The general the average economist feels blah, 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 right? Right? Think about that. Probably a loaded sample. Probably not a good way to sample. Right? Yes. Oh, let me ask her question first.
I know you kind of are past it, but can you give another example of stratified sampling?
Well, so stratified is any time we have a kind of I won't call it a hidden interest, but we have an interest in being able to disaggregate the data in a way that gives us more information. So we're interested in whether there's gender differences in how people learn, how students learn in third grade. And so we're interested in, some people learn better by memorizing, some people learn better by working problems, some people learn better by looking at graphs, they're graphically or picture oriented. And we got 3 or 4 different ways that people are better able to learn that we think are out there. And we want to find out what the best way to teach certain concepts are. And so we want to study those concepts. But it's very interesting to us that we stratify our population to make sure that we're not just dealing with likely Harvard freshman males. We want to give everybody a chance. We want to be able to draw conclusions about large population groups. Are there gender differences? So the response to Perry's work is a classic book by a lady named Mary Belinkie called Women's Ways of Knowing. And it stands on head Perry's work by explaining through some studies and things that in general, women learn differently than men. That's the argument that's presented there. And it's a classic work. It's just Perry's work had been around so long that it's immovable. You can't displace it with some sort of understanding that there might be a different way to learn, right? That a lot of people use. Okay, so, well, we want to stratify our sample so that we get at those subgroups and subpopulations. So we set up the study to give us the ability to do that. That's a stratified sample.
So is it like you're strategically planning?
You're strategically thinking about how you want to answer the question. My dissertation was a study of the Tennessee Remedial and Developmental Studies programs. It was a financial study or what have you. And what I wanted to get at was the Remedial and Developmental program in Tennessee was a mandatory program. If you didn't make a high enough test score, you had to take this remedial course before you could take the college level class. So you couldn't take college algebra until you took this course or that course, different levels to get ready for it. Well, there was an underlying thought here that was segregating people out of the opportunity for a true college course. That you had to, instead of taking 2 math courses to get through your degree program, now you had to take 4. And it was a non-starter. And I wanted to be able to disaggregate my data by region in Tennessee, right? In fact, I wanted to be able to disaggregate it by college to see which colleges were successful and which ones were not. So when I set up my sampling for that study, I made sure I had the same number from each college in the state so that I could draw some comparisons there. I sacrificed this overall randomness of the study in order to also be able to answer a question. Oh, and by the way, Jackson State Community College, Jackson, Tennessee, was the worst in the state in terms of getting students through remedial and developmental studies.
Just making sure the sample's fair and even?
That's what, so, but I had to convince my committee and the statistician on my committee that what I was doing was rational, giving the results I wanted to get to, okay? Now, if I turned around and used that study, which my major professor wanted me to do, to publish an article about remedial developmental studies in general across the U.S., that was extrapolation to a population I didn't study. I probably shouldn't do that, okay? But it happens all the time. But I probably shouldn't make statements about the overall U.S. experience based on a study in Tennessee, especially one where I designed the study to be able to go into the details of Tennessee, right? How is that representative of what's going on in Florida? Probably isn't, okay? All right, so we have all these different forms of sampling, and they all have their place. Sometimes they have to be done. Sometimes we need to do some of this. But the gold standard is an unbiased sample. All right, next topic. I'm going to move into measures of central tendency, which you all know is averages or what have you. And I think what I want to do here is bring up a Excel sheet for this. Let's do that. Do it a little differently here. So in your course section for each week, under course content, you'll have 5 weeks, I hope. I already had it open. You'll have 5 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I give you a lot of information for each week. So if I go under week 1, here's the sort of stuff I give you. I give you a homework assignment for week 1. We'll look at it here later. I give you additional resource material. So when I go into there, everything I teach, what I try to do is go out and find some open source document out there that does a good job of explaining it slightly differently than me. So that if you're struggling with the types of data, you can go out to this section, and I've brought in something that hopefully will help you. So this is a web link from something called analyticssteps.com, and it talks about the 4 types of data. Okay, and so here's an article about that if you're struggling, go to that, and it'll give you more examples and things of that sort. So I try to do that for every topic in lieu of having you buy a textbook. So there's something out. Some of them come from other universities. Some of them come from high school level sort of work in some instances, and some of them are coming from statistical organizations and things. So I give you that as additional resource material. I give you data sets for the homework. We'll look at that when we look at the homework assignment here in just a little while. And then I give you some data sets that either I'll use in class or that if you want to do some extra work, you could pop them up and use them. So I'm going to go to, and by the way, there's a team assignment out here that shows what team I've assigned you to. Okay, and so I've put the username for each student out there along with your name, and there's 9 teams, or 10 teams, and we do have one change. Somebody has dropped and added. Is Sebastian here tonight? There you are. So what I'll do is I'll update this and put you in team 9, and I'll edit it tomorrow if I think about it. I'll edit it Monday, and I'll update it, and it'll have you in there. I think we've lost Miss Zhang from the class, maybe. Is that correct? I think you're right. And so Sebastian's going to take that spot. So anyways, there's your team assignments there. You can start connecting with team members for that. So data sets used in class. I'm going to use this first one I have listed out here. I have a few out here. This is dentist revenue from a dental office over in New Albany. And I think it's weekly revenue for this dental office. So here is the dentist office revenue, and if I scroll over, you'll see starting with row 3, this is in dollars from 2019, and it shows the weekly revenue that was earned in that office. This is actually a subset of the revenue for cleanings. So it involved dental hygienist's work, not for fillings and surgeries and things of that sort. It's where the real gravy is in dental work. This was the cleanings revenue associated with it. And so there are, if you count all those, there are 20 weeks of data out there. And that's the raw data set. The variable is weekly revenue. So that's the variable under study. And so what I want to do is talk about how we go about summarizing that data. If we don't have a way of summarizing it, then we're simply going to have to look at those numbers and form opinions based on what we see there. And so in measures of central tendency, what we're trying to do is identify what the center point of that data is. What's a rational way to get to that center point of the data? The most common one is what, folks? The mean, right? Which we mistakenly call the average, right? And in reality, it's not the average, it's the mean. There are multiple averages, okay? But we tend to confuse those two, and I'll do it too, although I usually try to correct myself and say the mean. And for the mean, nobody has to memorize a formula in here ever. But, you know, we want to show them when they're needing to be shown. What we do is we take the 20 weeks, we add them all together, and we divide by how many there are to get the mean, right? So this formula is the sum of x over n. We add up each x, each weekly amount. We add them up, and we divide by how many weeks there are. And that's our formula, and that's not a good pen. So let me change. Right? So that's the typical formula that's used. But we give it different, we call it something slightly different depending upon whether we're dealing with a population or a sample, right? So if I had the historical books of this dental office going back 10 years, I could calculate for every week what they had in revenue, and I could do a population mean, right, for every week that ever existed for this dental office. And if I did, I would call it mu. So oftentimes you'll see it a mean averaged or listed as mu. Notice that's a Greek letter. Whenever we're dealing with population, we tend to label them with Greek letters. So if you see mu, you know you're dealing with a population. If I'm dealing with a sample, which I think I am here, I have 20 weeks of data, right, from 2019. So I'm probably dealing with a sample here. We call it X bar. So we use a Roman letter for it. Formula is the same, okay? We're just, by how we designate it, we're letting people know, am I dealing with a population mean for the whole population, which means it's accurate, or am I dealing with a sample, which means I'm going to use it to estimate for the population, right? And so that's what we're dealing with. And so we could plug it in, add them all up. A couple ways we could do it. Let me first show you how to do the add-ins in Excel. So if you're working in Excel right now, you could come down here, and I did this on this. I don't always give you the answers in my data set, but this is so straightforward, I went ahead and did it. If you go down here to the bottom, you'll see I have mean equals average. That's the formula. So if you come over here to the formula, you'll see I've written equals average, and then I highlighted the data set. So I'll do it right here so you can see it. Equals average. Oops, I got to hit enable editing. If I type in equals average, and then I come up here, I can click on it right here. And it tells me, put the numbers in. I can highlight them like this. I can close the parenthesis, and I should be able to hit enter. And I get $3,658. Notice that's the same as you have over here. So I've given you the answer, but I added them all up and got it. Excel will do that for you right now, no problem. That's the average. There is a better way to get to all this stuff, and that is to use an add-in that Excel has. So if I go here to data, right now I've waited. The add-in is not out there. So I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to put an add-in out there that you can put in for free that will let you do this stuff a little better. And so here's how you do it. If you go, and I've got a sheet out there that shows you this too. If you go down to options in Excel, there's an add-in function, options. And you can go down here to add-ins. And if you click on add-ins, it automatically, at the bottom here, has them listed for you or has a cell for them. So it's already there. You just hit go, and then you check the ones you want. And I check Analysis Toolpak and Analysis Toolpak VBA. I'm not interested in Euro currency tools in the statistics class, so I hit those two. I hit OK, and notice what it just did out here. It added out to the right something called data analysis. Now, I want to show you something before we use it. If I go back home, notice there's a section over here called Analyze Data. That's not the same. Excel's wonderful. Analyze Data is not the same as data analysis. So you can't go out here on the home screen and hit that. You have to go under Data and then hit Data Analysis. And what I can do is a section gives me a bunch of different things, and we're going to do a number of them in this course. We're going to use this multiple times. But the first one we're going to do is descriptive statistics. Right? We're going to describe a data set. And so we have our data set. I hit descriptive statistics. I hit OK, and then it gives me a screen to be able to do things. And the first thing it wants me to do is to tell it what the data is. And the input range is these cells where the weekly data points are. So here they are. And now by highlighting them, I put them in here as the input range. Then it tells me it wants me to, and it also says, are there labels in the first row? So sometimes it might say dollars in thousands or something like that above it, right? If I've highlighted that, I want to check that box so it doesn't include that label. Actually, it won't actually work. It'll kick it back and tell you there's something wrong with your loading, right? I don't have labels in the first row, so I'm not going to check that. I just have the raw data out there for this one, so I'm ready with the raw data. Then I need to tell it where to put the output. And I could put it in a whole new worksheet, in which case it would add a sheet 2 out here, or I can just put it out to the side. And I tend to like to keep the raw data close to the actual calculation. So I'm going to put it right here under, let's see, okay, output range. Click on that. I'm going to put it right here under M. And I don't have to put a big box there. It'll just start in that left-hand corner, right? And then I have to tell it what I want. And what I really want here are just the summary statistics. I don't need this other stuff that it's given me. We're just looking at descriptive statistics here. I just check. If I don't check summary statistics, it doesn't give me anything. So I got to check that and hit OK. And it gives me results. And I can spread it out a little bit so it's easier to see. And notice that what I'm going to get here is the exact same as what you see here in the result that's already in the, I've just done it again for you. So it gives the mean right there. The mean is $3,657.75 a week as the mean. And that's my most common measure of central tendency. Questions on that? You'll figure it out easy enough.
I was going to say that just all went.
Okay. So again, you understand the concept of how to calculate a mean. That's. So you'll just practice this once or twice and boom, it'll happen. It won't be a problem. You can either get to the answer by using the formula I used here, which is equal average. One of the weaknesses of Excel is they try to use as little statistical jargon as they can get away with. So the mean is calculated by typing in equal average, when in fact the median and the mode are also averages, right? But they're technically correct on those formulas. They're not on this one. It should say equal mean is what it should say. They don't. You can type it in and put it there, or you can just run this data analysis piece and get them all, mean, median, and mode. Okay? Get it all in one fell swoop.
You had said that the
the syllabus there that that link is how people with Macs would access Excel?
So a Mac is slightly different to add that in there, and so if you have a Mac, work with somebody else on your team will have it too. It may be slightly different to put it to get that tool pack. It's available for the Mac. It's just sometimes the steps are a little different. Okay? Right? There's nothing I'm doing tonight that you can't calculate using the basic formulas with Excel. So if you don't get the data analysis tool pack to add in between now and next week, you're okay. Either way works.
The Excel that's just a part of our like Outlook package, that's
Yeah, so the Excel, that's just the basic Excel product, okay? All I'm doing is adding this free tool pack out here that makes life a little easier because I run it once and I can answer all the questions.
I see.
As opposed to having to type it in 6 different times to get the 6 questions that I'm asking here. So we have a mean of $3,657. Now, if we have perfectly distributed data, if our data set is perfectly distributed, our median would be about in that area, be very close. What's the difference between a mean and a median, somebody? The median of a data set is what?
The center of the data.
The exact center. If you array the data set from high to low or low to high, it's the middle point, the point in the middle, right? So that's another form of an average. And the median is very worthwhile knowing because it tells you a lot about your data set. We use the mean for most of our calculations in statistics, but the median can be very telling to us. So I can come out here and calculate the median. And here's the formula for it, equals median. So if I start calculating that, equals median. Notice what happens as I start typing. It brings up choices, and one of them is median. That's the only choice it brings up. That's the one I want. So if I click on it, it says they want the numbers included. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to highlight the full set. I'm going to close the parens. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to give me the median. So my mean weekly revenue is $3,658. My median is not that different. It's $3,613. A slight difference, but not dramatic. Right? Does that make sense? If it was perfectly synchronous data, they would be identical. That's telling me, though, that there are more weeks that are pulling the data point up, the average up, because the average included all 20 weeks. The median just looked at what the center point was once you ranked them. It didn't worry about the intervals between them. It ranked them and picked the center point, if that makes sense. Yes?
So that means like one of them is saying like it's looking at the weeks, like some of the weeks are higher, and then the other one is looking at the center, like as a whole.
So what it means is the mean included every single data point in the calculation, right? That's a strength of the mean. The median didn't care what those numbers were. It just put them in order and picked the middle one. You follow what I'm saying? What if there was a week in there where the hygienists were on strike and that number was 0, right? It would lower our mean some. It wouldn't change our median at all because the median didn't care what that number was.
Okay.
The median is the middle 0. So if you take this 1975 and change it to a 0, the median is still going to be 3613 because it doesn't factor that into the calculation. That makes sense? So when you're dealing with things like salaries, right, or home prices in Louisville, or something of that sort, because you have such a skewed data set, I mean, I can't remember the last coach to Louisville. When Rick Pitino left Louisville, and sold his $6 million home, right? That had quite an impact on the average home sale in Louisville that year. Would you agree with that? Had an impact, a significant impact. Whereas the median home price sale didn't change at all,
Right.
because they picked the center home price. Does that make some sense? Classic story in anybody here from Illinois Wesleyan? I'm about to throw them under the bus. Good solid Methodist school in Illinois, right? They ran an advertisement in the 1980s and got some real criticism for it because they advertised that the average starting salary of their graduates for that particular year, I think it was 84, maybe it's 86, 1986. Their average starting salary for business majors at Illinois Wesleyan was higher than the average starting salary of Ivy League institutions that offered business degrees, right? And first of all, a lot of people don't realize it, but most of your Ivy League institutions are liberal arts at the undergraduate level, and they don't offer business degrees. So Harvard doesn't offer a business degree to undergraduates. You can get an economics degree, you can't get a business degree. But some schools do. There are a handful that do offer business degrees at the undergraduate level. But here was the real story behind that. There were 23 graduates in Illinois Wesleyan that year, and one of them was an individual whose name was Jack Sikma. And Jack Sikma came to Illinois Wesleyan as a 6'6" center for the basketball team. And he graduated at 7 feet 1 inches tall and was the number 2 overall pick by the Seattle Supersonics, just as salaries really started taking off, and he signed over $1 million signing bonus for his first year. So when you calculated the average starting salary for the mean starting salary for Illinois Wesleyan business majors, you were taking a $1 million+ salary and spreading it over 23 people. And you can do that math and see how much that raised the mean. So their mean starting salary was like $24,000 a year without Jack Sikma in the data set. But with him, it was like $60-some thousand a year or something to that effect, right? And they ran an ad recruiting students for their business program based on that piece of that statistic, right? A little unethical, would you agree? A little bit of shadiness going on there. The median, however, was that 24,000 or so, because the typical 22 of them got real jobs. Yep.
So, okay, that makes more sense because, like, I think about if a person's trying to purchase a house and the loan officer, he would probably want to go with the mean because he wants it to go look a little bit higher.
Yep.
He wants them to qualify. But then if you want the actual, it would be a little bit safer to go with the median if you want to be right in the middle.
And I'm going to argue you should look at both always, just to get a gander at your data set to see if it's skewed one direction or the other.
Because I think about like overtime, because like 1 month.
So if you look at if you look at the mean salary of full-time employees at my college, I have 550 full-time employees, right? If you look at the mean salary, it is higher than the median salary. Because my salary and the VPs, and there's 15 or 20 people who do significantly more than twice the typical employee salary. Okay, it's not ridiculous. I'm not making coaches money, but I do better, right? And so that salary can be a little misleading if all you look at is the mean. It's also telling to look at the median. Does that make sense? Okay, because the median is probably a better gauge of where the typical salary is for a Jefferson Community and Technical College employee. Okay, and that same way with house prices sale. For every $3 or $4 million sale, that really pulls the average sale up. And if you don't see the median, you may not pick up on that happening to your data. So we always kind of want to look at those two for sure. Now, before I go further than that, it's not a class about formulas, but let me show you this. We have a little formula we can use to get to the median, okay? And so you array them, you rank them from low to high, and then the formula is to take in the number of data values, there's 20 weeks here, plus 1, divided by 2. So you'll see why in just a second. But that's the formula. So we have 20 weeks. So our formula is to take n plus 1 divided by 2. So it's 20 weeks plus 1. That's 21 divided by 2. The number that falls in the 10th and a half point is your median. So when you list these in order, and I didn't, but when you list these in order from high to low, you actually have to take the average of the 10th and the 11th. It's the midpoint of the 10th and the 11th point. That makes sense? If we had 19 weeks instead of 20 weeks, it'd be 19 plus 1, that'd be 20, divided by 2, it'd be the 10th number in your listing. So if you have an odd number, it's an easy calculation. If you have an even number, you're going to have to average 2 numbers to get to the median, because it's going to be in between 2 numbers. But even in this scenario, only 2 numbers form that median, the 2 that were closest to it. Doesn't matter how extreme the others are. Okay? So you lose a lot of information from your data set when you use the median, whereas the mean uses every single data point. So you're keeping as much information about your data set as you can when you're using the mean. Okay? I like to see them both, but I do my calculations when I do them almost always on the mean, because it is the most representative of the data. And then the final one is the mode, which is more of a, it's not used nearly as much, but mainly what we're looking at there is there a pattern of behavior in the data set such that any one value is happening multiple times, right? And in something where you're dealing with weekly revenue, it's probably meaningless. But if you look down through here, we have 19, let's see. Well, when I do mode, instead of doing it the hard way and looking myself, let's do it. I can put in equal mode, and notice it gives me a couple of choices, right? And you could have more than one mode. A mode is a data point that's occurring most frequently, right? And it could be that there's 2 of them or 3 of them that are happening more often. So I usually, instead of just doing mode, I do mode multi, okay? And when I click on that, it still wants that range so it can look at all the values. And I close it, and I hit enter, and notice it gave me 2 numbers as my answer, because I asked it to identify more than one if there was more than one. So 2020 is data point number 19, and also data point number 5, and 3700 is data point number 20, and also number 6. They're right beside each other. How about that? So we would call this data set bimodal. It's got 2 modes. I don't think that adds any extra value to what we're looking at here in this particular context. Okay? So, but that is a third form of an average that you see. I gave a test once in undergraduate stats, and the student wrote that was, when I asked what do you call it when it's got more than one mode, they said comodal. I gave them credit for toilet humor. I thought that was a good answer. It's actually bimodal. So there it is. That's the mode. We'll rarely reference the mode in this class, but we will look at means and medians. We will look at means and medians. That's measures of central tendency. Now, if you're interested in this stuff, there's other forms of averages. There is this mean is technically the arithmetic mean, right? There's a geometric mean that's out there, a different way of calculating a mean. In finance, when we think about returns on investments, if I invest $100 today and it earns 4% next year, over the course of next year, now I have $104. If it earns 4% the next year, I have more than $108 because I earned 4% on the $100 and I earned 4% on the 4%. When I calculate that growth rate, that's actually a geometric mean, not an arithmetic mean. Okay, so I'm actually, the magic of compounding comes into play. We don't, in base statistics, we use the arithmetic mean. Okay, so we're not overly worried about that. But in a finance class, you might use as a mean the average annual growth rate, or you might use a compounded growth rate, which is a different form of a mean. Okay, we're going to focus on the arithmetic mean here. Let's see, do I want to do anything else in that? That's measures of central tendency. Those are the three. One of the other big weaknesses in how people present data is they often have a data set like this, and they'll talk about the mean, but they won't talk about how variable the data is. Right? And if we're dealing with a data set and I tell you, hey, the average salary at JCTC is $56,000 a year, that gives you some information. But if I tell you the average salary at JCTC is $56,000 a year with a range from $32,000 to $200,000, that's giving you a lot more information about the data set. I gave you two more numbers, but I told you a heck of a lot more about the data set just then. One of the key things I told you there was the mean was 56,000, but if you'll look at if I were to plot those salaries, it's going to look something like this in the plot. In other words, the mean is the top part of this curve, 56,000. But I said it ranged from 32 down here on this end to 200 way out here on this end. I've now given you enough information that you can think about the distribution of the data, the variability of the data. And so we have measures of central tendency, means and medians, that everybody's comfortable with, and they hear them a lot. The average score on the exam was an 82. Right? In and of itself, that's not very meaningful. Right? That doesn't help me. As soon as I give people some variability information, though, now you get a better sense of where your test score fell. Right? And so we call those measures of dispersion or measures of variability. And so we have several of those we want to use. This particular one, just to go into it a little bit, when you have a longer tail like this on one end, we would say this data is skewed right. Okay? Skewed right. So wherever the longer tail points on the data set, we're saying it's skewed that direction. Doesn't mean we can't use the data, right? But it isn't a symmetrical sort of setup of data. There aren't as many above the mean as below the mean. Where would the median fall in this data set? Where would the median fall? The median is not going to worry about this number or this number. It's going to find the center of this whole thing. It's going to be less, okay? Because these high salaries are going to pull the mean forward because they're included in it. So the median is going to be somewhat less than 50. If the data set was perfectly distributed, the old bell-shaped curve that we hear about, right through the median, the mean, and even the mode would all be identical. They would all be, because and people have to get used to the concept of looking at a graph of data. These are your data points under here, under this curve, right? So your most common, in this particular one, the extremes are the same distance away from the mean. It's perfectly, and the most common, in this case salary, would fall right under the top of the curve. So the mean, the median, the mode are all identical. Okay, in that. Not real common in real data. Occasionally you hit it, but not real common. You usually have some level of skewness when you plot data. There's usually something there like that. It's not perfect. Think about test scores, right? Unless you're taking organic chemistry, chances are the average on the test isn't a 50. There may be 100 possible points, and in a perfectly distributed test, maybe you get an average of 50, and everybody's spread evenly on it, right? tends not to be the case. The average might be an 85 on the exam. Well, that's going to be data that looks like this. I'm not very good at drawing. Let me see if I can make that better. Probably made it too steep there. Come over here like this and then down. Right? So an 85 was the mean. Right? It tops out at 100. Can't go higher than that. Right? But some poor person down here wound up with a 52 or something. Right? You had skewed left data in that particular case for test scores. Mainly a function of the fact that you had a maximum score, and the test was written in a fashion that lots of people got closer to that maximum score. It forced the data into that kind of distribution. That's where I talked about my major professor at Drexel trying to write his test so that didn't happen. He wanted to grade under the normal curve, right? He wanted to grade on. Common thing, I think, in medical schools historically, right? And so you go into the library at a medical school to look up a journal article, and you go to that and you pull that resource off the library shelf in the medical school library, and you open it up to it because you're studying, and somebody's torn it out of the book, right? Because there's two ways to do well in that environment. Either study and learn the material or make sure others can't, right? And both of them work equally well for doing good, right? Makes for a very competitive environment, not conducive to teamwork when they're grading that way. Law schools are notorious for grading, right? So anyways, for what that's worth. So that's measures of central tendency. Now we're going to start looking at the variability across the data set. And so there are a couple typical ones that are used. The most common one that people learn early on is a straightforward calculation called the range of data, right? So I gave this data set here of salaries at Jefferson, saying they're ranging from a low of 32,000 to a high of 200,000. Simple calculation for the range. The high value minus the low value tells you the range. So I'm going to erase mean and median, and I'm going to start with the range. It's better than nothing, but it's not a very good strong measure. Range is high minus low. In this case, the range of salaries is going to be 168,000. 168,000. 200,000 minus 32,000 equals 168,000 is my range. Right? Everybody see how I did that? Right? What's the weakness of the range? Right off the top. What's the weakness of using that value? It ignores everything in between. It only considers the high and the low. Right? So if we're looking at the range of salaries at Illinois Wesleyan in 1984 for business, it's going to be this huge number. When in fact 22 of the 23 were all within a much tighter range. Didn't get valued that way. We looked at the extremes. So the weakness of the range is it only considers the extreme values. Okay? It's telling, it can give you some information. We tend not to use it for calculations. Instead, we use the variance and the standard deviation. So I didn't calculate the range here because it's so straightforward, but notice that when you do the data analysis in the tool pack, one of the values it gives you is the range. So it calculates that for you. If you don't have it, you can do it high minus low. But in this case, it got a 4,100. And the high was a 5,600. And the low was a, I don't know, 1,900. So 5,600 minus 1,900, I don't know, that doesn't seem right.
There is one that's 6,000.
Oh, there was, well, I'm sorry, 6,000 minus 1,900. I can't get all 20 of them in there. There we go. Well, I still don't have them all in there, but that's close enough. So 6,000 minus 1,900 gives us the 4,100. You can do it using Excel. You can do it using this method. So that's one. That's not as good, however, as the variance and the standard deviation. And this is it's a little more complex, although what I want you to do is see how it's calculated, but we actually have a formula for calculating it that makes it simpler. And so when we're looking at the variance, first of all, there are actually two formulas, one for a population and one for a sample. We use the same formula for the mean, but for a variance, because of population we use Greek symbols, we call that sigma. Actually, we call it sigma squared. You'll see why. And for a sample, we call it S for standard deviation. For a sample, we call it S. It's going to be the standard deviation. Okay? So here's the formula for variance. It is, and don't think you have to remember this or anything, it is the sum of each value minus the mean of the data set squared divided by n. N being 20 data points in this data set. And so here's how we calculate it. We've got 20 weeks. We have to have the mean to calculate the variance, because the variance is a measure of dispersion around the mean. So we need the mean to do it. The mean was 3,658, right? So we're going to take each x, each individual x, and we're going to subtract it from 3,658 to see how far each value is from the mean. We'll have 20 of those, right? Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, right? Because some of them are above the mean and some of them are below the mean. And if we do that and we just add them together, they cancel each other out. We'll get an answer of 0. That's the definition of the mean, right? All the data points, how far they are away from the mean. That's, by definition, that's what the mean is, right? So I like to say statisticians hate negative numbers, right? So what we do is we square those differences so that the negative numbers become positive. So we square those differences and we add them together. And so we end up with 20 values. So for the very first one, well, let's use a straightforward one. The second data point was 6,000. So for that particular data point, we'd have 6,000 minus 3,658, and we'd square that difference. And we got to do that 20 times, once for each data point. And then we add those calculations all together, and we divide by 20. And that's how it's done. And so, if we, instead of using the formula, we do it using Excel, I come out here. Notice what happens. I'm going to move it out here to the right a little bit. When I write equals variance, notice I get some choices, quite a few choices. The first two are the most common. The variance for a population and the variance for a sample, right? So let's do the variance for the population first. So if you know you're dealing with a population, you would hit that and you would double click on that, and now it wants you to do the same thing here. And enclose it in parenthesis and hit it, and there's my answer. And I could change it into dollars and stuff, probably should. Home, let's see here. Let's make it dollars or what have you, and we don't need the pennies. We'll round a little bit there. And there's the answer. The variance is 1,499,199. Okay, if I've done that right. A3 to A22, I think that's correct. So there's my variance. Now that's the variance for a population. If we were dealing with a sample, and that's what we're dealing with here, a sample of 20 weeks, we make an adjustment to this formula. And I should have enclosed it maybe like that. And here's the adjustment we make. This is for sigma squared, a population variance. For S squared, a sample variance, the formula looks like this, equals sum of x minus x bar squared all over n minus 1. We take 1 away from the denominator. And that's the formula. A lot of times in basic stats classes, there's no explanation given for why we do that, or it's not a satisfactory explanation, right? Our goal is, if we've done a good job of designing our study, is that our sample variation is going to be comparable to our population variation. There's going to be a relationship there. If we've sampled well and we've sampled enough, there's going to be a congruence there. But here's the problem. If I have a data set with 200 U of L MBA students and their heights, and I calculate the variation of that data, isn't it natural for you to think that data is going to have more variability than if I have a sample of 10 of those students? Would you agree? 10 is, just by the nature of the fact that you're only looking at 10, it's not likely to be as variable as the population is, right? If I want that mean, not the variation, if I want the mean, let's say the mean height of U of L MBA students, mu, is 5 feet 7 inches. Nope, 5 feet 9 inches, I said earlier. 5 feet 9 inches. That's the mean, right? And I want an X bar, a sample. When I do sampling, I want an X bar. In a perfect world, the X bar is going to be 5 feet 9 inches. If my sample does a really good job of predicting, they're going to be the same. Not usually doesn't happen, but that's the goal. That's what I'd like to see, right? Think about that sample. Let's say it's a sample of 10 people. N equals 10, right? So I randomly select 10 of you, send you out in the hallway. I bring you in one at a time. We measure you, and we write down your height, right? Number 1 comes in, they're 5 feet 10 inches. Number 2 comes in, they're 5 feet 8 inches. Hey, we're right on. Average is 5'9". Number 3 comes in, they're 5 feet 11 inches. Number 4 comes in, they're 5 feet 7 inches. Hey, that's +2 -2. We've got 4 in now, and they're still 5'9", right where we want them to be. We keep bringing people in, right? At what point do we have to bring in somebody of a specific height?
The last one.
The last one. The last one is not random. If we're going to have a sample that accurately looks at the mean of the population, that 10th person, that value is forced, right? So the way we talk about it in statistics is in a sample of 10, you have 9 degrees of freedom. Heard that phrase, degrees of freedom? The sample is free to do whatever it wants for those first 9 values. But if your sample accurately reflects the mean of the population, you're not free for that 10th person or that 10th item to be random. It's got to force to this number here, right? So we make this adjustment in sampling to show the fact that we don't have that freedom for that last item in the sample, and we're going to make that adjustment. So we throw an n-1 in there instead. And we expect it to be a little different because we're only looking at 10, not 200 in the population. So when I calculate and I notice what I just did here, so I've made a mistake. Notice I put this on the line of standard deviation. I meant to put it on the line for a population variance. So I'm going to cut it and paste it down here. paste. I'm dealing with a variance. And right above it, I'm going to calculate the variance of a sample. Let's make sure I did that right. Equal variance of a population, which I didn't have labeled here. And now I'm going to do equals variance of a sample. And that's the only adjustment. The numerator stays the same. Variation of a sample. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to highlight the whole thing. Close it, put it in here. And so it is slightly larger. Okay, I actually get a slightly larger value, or what have you, with that adjustment. But that is my estimation. It's not entirely accurate, but it is my estimation of the population's variance based on the sample. The actual variance of the population is right here. The sample estimates it to be this using the formula. It's not going to be precise. Hopefully it's going to be close. Now that number is huge relative to the mean. The mean was 3,657. Look at the variances here, right? Much bigger numbers. Hard to look at them and draw anything. So we simplify the variance frequently by using what's called the standard deviation. And the standard deviation, we squared things to get this variance. And that's why that number is so large. It's differences squared. So by taking the square root of this number, we remove a lot of that impact, and we end up with a number that's much more comparable to the mean. So the standard deviation, which is in most applications, which is what we use oftentimes, the standard deviation is the square root of the variance. That's what it amounts to. Okay? So if I came over here to the right and I went equals square root, and that's one of the options I have. I'm just showing it to you. Equals square root, and I'm assuming that I know what I'm doing. See here? And I hit this, and I hit that, and I go like that. I get a value of, oh my goodness, I did something wrong. Let's undo that and do it again. Equals square root. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not going to work that way. It's not going to work that way. So I'm going to show I don't know what I'm doing. It's going to do each one and give me 20 of them. That's not what I want. So I'm going to clear contents. Let's just do it the way it's supposed to be done. Instead of the variance for the sample, I'm going to go equals standard deviation. And notice there's two there, STDEVP and STDEVS. I'm on the sample line. Let's do it for the sample first. STDEV.S. Okay. And I'm going to highlight this and close parens and hit enter. And I get 1256. Okay. So I've lost my thing here. Sigma squared is the variance. Sigma is the standard deviation, but that would be for a population. S is my sample variance, so S is my standard deviation. S squared is my sample variance, so S DEV.S is my sample standard deviation, and it just gave me the number 1256. Notice if we scroll up into the data analysis stuff, it gives me, and this is a weakness in Excel, it gives me the 1256 number. It automatically assumes in Excel, if you're doing data analysis and you do the descriptive statistics, it automatically assumes you're working with a sample. So it calculates only the sample for you. It doesn't calculate the population stuff. So if I had a population of data and I used this information as part of the summary, I would actually get it wrong. I need to do the actual calculations down here for the variance. Right? It's going to assume that. So, but there it is, the 1256. For a population, it's going to be equals standard deviation for a P, a population. There it is. Going to highlight the data. Parenthesis, enter. And there's that number, 1224. Okay. Now what you're getting here is data that is a result that is comparable to the mean. So I can look at the mean and say the mean is $3,657 a week or $58 a week in revenue. And by looking at the standard deviation, I can get a sense of the variability of the data. Now you have to look at a lot of things to sort of get this sense, but what we're going to find in future weeks is, generally speaking, if I go plus or minus 2 times this number, 2 times this, about 95% of my sample is going to fall in that range. That's a general rule of thumb. In other words, 1,250, $2,500 is 2 times that. So 3,657 plus or minus $2,500 is where the majority of the weeks fall. It gives me some relative knowledge to be able to think not just about what the mean is, but how variable the data is, right? And this data is not extremely variable, right? The larger that number, the greater the variability of the data set. And you'll get used to it as you look at some of that, right? Now we're going to hit a topic later in this class called analysis of variance, okay, where we actually use the variance to do some interpretation of stuff. We'll use a computer to do it or what have you. But typically it's the standard deviation that's used in statistics. Now when you run the data analysis section, data analysis, and you hit descriptive statistics, and you hit OK, and you fill it in, you get all the answers you need at one point in time. Okay, I'm going to cancel it. You get all of them. There's the mean, there's the median. Now notice the mode. That's another weakness in Excel. It had 2 modes. It only gave us one of them, the one that it found first. It found 2020 and 2020, and it found it before the 3700 one, so it only gave you one. It's not capable of identifying multi-modes in that. Then we have the standard deviation. We have the variance. Now it is smart enough to tell you that it's a sample variance. It's also a sample standard deviation. It's the square root of the 157, right? So that's, both of them are samples. And we have the range, the third one. And it gives us some extra stuff. Tells us what the minimum number is. Tells us what the maximum number is. Tells us what the, if we add them all together, over the 20 weeks, $73,155 was earned. Gives us that. Tells us in. There's 20 of them. So it gives us a lot of information. It gives us a couple more things here, kurtosis and skewness, right? So it's telling you how skewed the data set is. Is the data set very skewed? The closer it is to 0, the less skewed the data set. Okay? If it's a positive number, it's skewed right a little bit. If it's a negative number, it's skewed left. Now, we're not going to focus on skewness, but I'm just pointing that out. Didn't even mention kurtosis. Sounds like an infection. It's not. It's how steep the curve is. So you can have a normal distribution that's pretty low and spread out, very variable data, but it's very uniform. Or you can have a normal distribution that's very steep, right? And the kurtosis has to do with the height of it, the height of the curve, okay? We're not going to worry about that in here. So that is measures of variation. Let me see if there's something else I want to hit on this. I think we're getting pretty close to what I wanted to cover. Okay, let's do one other thing before we leave here and look at the homework. since we're out here, one thing I didn't do when I talked about sampling was show you how to go ahead and do a random sample using Excel. Okay, so if you wanted to random, let's say this was a population, that this business has been in business for 20 weeks, and they want us to do some sort of analysis to help them understand what it looks like their revenue picture is going to be going forward. And I've got 20 weeks worth of data, the population, it's not sampled data, and I want to look at it and make some conclusions. I might want to sample from that data set. So let's see how we might do that. If I go to data analysis, one of the things I get to choose from is a sampling section. Right? So if I hit on sampling and hit OK, it gives me a chance to sample from my data. Here's my data set. So I put it in my input range. There's no labels to worry about. I want a random sample. Notice it defaulted to that. I'm going to take a random sample. Why don't I sample 5 of the 20 weeks? Now I'm going to do something interesting here. I want to sample 5 of the 20 weeks. I'm going to put a 7 in there, if it lets me. 7. I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, I'm going to put a couple extra in there. My output range is where I want to put those weeks. Let's put them right down here on the right-hand side, low on M. I could put them in a new worksheet, but I want to leave them on this same page. I've loaded it up. I'm only going to use 5. But I put 7 in and hit OK, and it picked randomly 7 of those. And I got lucky here. You can see immediately why I picked 7 instead of 5. Right? Notice it picked 3,500. Oh, my goodness. It picked 3,500 3 times. It randomly picked 5, and it wound up selecting the same number 3 times. That make sense? Chances are I don't want to include the same week twice, right? So my first week I'm going to include in my sample is the week that had 5,100, 5,150. There it is, week number 9. The second one is the 3,500, week number 12. Okay, let me put that out here. 9, 12. The third one is week 12 again. I've already included it in the sample, right? I don't want to include the same data point again, so I skip it. The next one is week 19. Actually, it's in there twice, but I'm going to include that one. The fourth one, can't use that one. For some reason, the sampling randomly picked the same one. I don't think I've ever had that happen before. I'm going to go to this one, though. 3,900 is the 17th week. And finally, the 3,335 is the 16th week. Those are my sample observations. Of the 20 weeks, I pick week 9, week 12, week 19, week 17, and week 16 in my sample. I put 7 because I knew there was a chance, because I had bimodal data, that the same one was going to get picked multiple times, right? Well, not just that, the same week could have been picked even if it wasn't that way. I know that because my population is so small, it's reasonable that I'm going to wind up getting the same week picked twice. So by putting 7 out there, I gave myself a cushion, right? Otherwise, you just got to go sample a couple more. Got to do it and add a couple more at the bottom there. But that would be my sample, those weeks, right there. And it's randomly generated. All right, questions on that? Let's look at how the homework works. Yes?
If you run the data analysis and it doesn't give you, like, if there's more than one, repeated number, do you need to do it, like, on Excel separately to get more than one, or can you just put the one it gives you?
So if you're doing the mode and you're really interested in whether it's bimodal data, you need to do it the way I did it down here, okay, which is equal mode.mult, because then it'll pick up multiple modes.
But on our homework, we can just put one.
In the homework, I'm okay. I'm not going to punish you because Excel doesn't do that. right, correctly. But that's what you would do. If the mode was of interest to you, you would want to make sure you use this in case there's a multiple modes.
Okay.
Okay? And the larger the data set, the more likely you're going to run into bimodal data or multimodal data. Okay? All right, so let's look at the homework a little bit and spend a minute looking at how the data sets look so that you understand what you have to work with. So I'm going to go out of this. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to go to homework assignment so you see what I'm asking you to do. We got a few minutes and we'll be out of here. But I do want to take some time so you get off on a good start with your homework. All right. So the main thing I'm after from you, well, I'm after you to answer the questions and to write up a little business memo. No more than 1.5 pages long. You get longer than that, you've overshot the goal here. It's not to write me a treaty. I got to read 52 of them. At 1.5 pages, that's plenty. Okay, so we ought to be able to get this done. So, question number 1, types of data. So I give you a bunch of types and I ask you, give me the 4 levels, which you think it is, and whether it's discrete or continuous. So let's look at the very first one. The number of miles that bicyclists ride per week in some sort of program in Louisville, on the Louisville Loop. The number of miles bicyclists ride per week. Okay? Number of miles. Can somebody have ridden twice as far as somebody else? Would you agree with that? What level data do we have? Ratio. That quickly you know if you can make that sort of statement, boom, you're up in quantitative data, right? And it's a ratio. And then is it discrete, or if we're measuring it, can we get better and better measurements of the distance? So is it discrete or continuous? Continuous. So you can get tenths of miles, you can get, whatever, furlong, however you want to measure, you can figure out. There you go. That's what I'm after. Some of them are easier than others. I don't want to give anything away. The last one here, look at it, because I asked you to come back to it in question number 4. The GPA of May 2021 U of L graduates earning a bachelor's degree. So all U of L graduates earning a bachelor's degree, their GPA. Okay? We got 2,500 graduates, and I got 2,500 graduating GPAs for those students. That's number, so you do that many times. Question number 2. By the way, this whole thing shouldn't take you more than an hour. Measures a central tendency. Select 2 data sets from those provided for the class. We'll look at them in a second. Calculate the mean, median, and mode for 2 of the variables for each data set. So I want to get you used to looking at 2 data sets, and from each data set, pick 2 variables from each of the data sets. And identify the type of data for the variable that you select. So tell me what type of data it is. Hint, spoilers alert. If you pick nominal data and you give me a mean, you didn't pay attention in class, right? Because I don't want to know the mean of nominal data because you're not supposed to be able to calculate the mean. So you need to pick higher order data, a higher order variable, and use that variable to calculate it. And then I ask you, can you draw any conclusions regarding what you see in what you calculated? What can you tell me about what you calculated there? Help me understand it. Question 3, using the same data sets and the same variables, calculate the range, the variance, and the standard deviation for each data set. So I want you to give me that information. You're dealing with samples here, so the summary statistics will work. So if you use the data analysis tool pack, 2 and 3 are all coming out in that same blob of answers. You don't have to do them individually. Okay? And I want you to identify that and draw some conclusions from that. We'll do it here in just a second for one of the data sets. And then finally, question number 4, prepare a business memo, no more than 1.5 pages long. So if you haven't written business memos before, Google business memo format. You're going to write it to somebody, from somebody, with a date and a subject line. Then you're going to write the memo, right? I want it written to some supervisors, not written to me, because I want you to think of your audience as a colleague at work, somebody that you're trying to help understand what you've done. Okay, so write your memo as though you're writing to a small group of supervisors at your company who probably had a stats class when they were undergraduates, but probably who didn't retain very much from the course. Okay, they endured that class. They didn't learn anything. So dumb your memo down a little bit, right? Try to write it in language that even your spouse could understand. Okay, and so dumb it down for people, right? And write me a page and a half, and here's the 3 things I want you to address. So it's 3 paragraphs. A, discuss the logic used in determining the type of data that you used when you said the type of data for the GPA, that last one there. Explain your logic. There's no right or wrong answer here. I want you to talk about how you got to where you got. Okay? And remember, I said don't necessarily think that AI knows what it's talking about. Provide your own example of how someone might misuse a GPA if they don't know exactly what type of data they're dealing with. Help me understand how that could be misused if somebody doesn't understand. There's 2 questions in that paragraph. Number 1 challenge I face when people turn in their homework is they've answered the first part, not the second part. Happens all the time. So try to answer both sections there. Question B, discuss the pitfalls that one faces when summarizing data using measures of central tendency. So what's the risk here of a mean or a median, right? And provide, it should be a new, not covered in class, example of the misuse of such a measure. So think about how a mean could be misleading or a median could be misleading, and talk about that some. And then your 3rd paragraph, discuss the pitfalls that one faces when using an average and not also qualifying that calculation with information about the variability of the data. So often what we hear people talk about is the average was, and they don't talk at all about the variation of the data. And I get it on the news every night when I watch it. They'll talk about some study and give the mean, and they won't talk about how variable the data is. And explain why the standard deviation is generally preferred over the range as a measure of variability. Why do we go through the mess of calculating a standard deviation when we could theoretically use the range? What's the reason for that? That's what I'm asking from you. So before we leave, we got a couple more minutes. I want to look at one of the data sets so it's not foreign to you. I'm going to close that. Did I mess that up? There it is. And I'm going to look at data sets for homework. So be careful. I don't want you to pick a data set used in class. I want you to pick a data set for homework. And I give you 4 of them. The first one is actual data from my college. Okay, so we use data analytics to predict whether or not a student needs extra help to succeed. We didn't do this a decade ago. When I got there, I said, folks, we're going to do it. When I got there, the average graduation rate, and I'm not trying to take credit for this, it's just factual. The mean graduation rate for our students over a 3-year period was 12.9%. 12.9% of our students were completing their degree program in that period of time. Now, community college, lots of students aren't coming for a degree. Lots of students are transferring. We send 800 to U of L every year. Half of those are transferring without their degree. They're ready to go, they move on. But the graduation rate was 12.9 10 years ago. We're finishing up this year's calculation at the end of summer. It's going to be right at 40% in 10 years. And it takes 3 years to get to that calculation. So in 7 graduating classes, we've moved the rate of graduation from basically, we've tripled it in 7 graduating classes. It's dramatic. Why? We now know how to predict whether a student's going to be successful, and we use our data to help us focus on what we need to focus on to make sure they hang in there. So I give you some of that data. So let's look at that data set real quick. Let's see if I can download it and show you what you're dealing with. And this is real data. Now, I've taken a sample for this data set of 100 of those students. So the data set's actually about 4,300 students, and we update it every year. I've randomly sampled 100 of them. And you've got these different variables across the top. And out here on the right is a code. At the bottom here it says code. That explains each one of them. Some of them are easy to understand. Here's their age. 18, 19, age. What level data would age be? Can somebody be twice as old as somebody else? Yeah, what level data you got? Ratio, okay? Here's gender. You have to go to the coding to see that for gender, 1 is a female. Male is 0. So we give it a numerical value, but it's nominal data. It's the lowest level data, right? And so if I go back to the data set here somewhere, nope, I've lost it. There it is, random sample of 100. We have gender. So that first person is a 1. That means that's a female, right? Can I calculate a mean for that? No, don't pick that variable as your variable. Pick a variable that you can. ACT reading score, right? We discovered, we didn't know this, but we were focused on math and English. Math and English scores. Reading is the best predictor of success. If you can read, you can succeed in college, right? And that's a better predictor. We use ACT reading or a reading score if they haven't taken the ACT. We test them for that, and that helps us predict. Here's those scores. Now that, by the way, is interval data, because the lowest you can get on the ACT is a 12 in the reading section. The highest is a 36, right? Here's the scores of the students we have for that test. If they took an internal reading test, we have an equivalency, and we're able to plot it into this. So we know what the equivalent ACT score is. So Pell Grants, whether or not they have a Pell Grant, we have some demographic stuff here. That demographic is going to be nominal. So if you're going to use this data set, you need to use something like interval data, the reading score, the age, that's ratio. We got how many credits they took. Somebody could take twice as many college credits as somebody else. We have their end of semester GPA, and we have their high school GPA out there. Those are both, you're able to calculate a mean for those. So you got about 5 variables here that you could pick 2 of to calculate the mean, median, mode, and the variance measures, standard deviation and range. There's that data set. Okay, and you do it for 100 of them. All right, do one more thing. Show you the other data set here. The other data set, the other 3 come from the same data set. Let me go back and show you that. And then we're out of here. Oops. Data set for homework. So this is from that survey of survey of consumer finances. And what I've done here, let me back out of that again so you can see it. Data sets for homework. I've broken it into 3 pieces. Okay? There's one that is a random survey of the whole, a random sample of the whole survey. There's one where what I did was I took the top 1% of the net worth in the survey. The richest of the richest. We hear about the top 1%. Here they are in the survey. So you got that. And then the second one, and that has about, there's 6,000 families in this data set. So there's about 60 of them in that sample. Then this one up here is also interesting. It's the lowest 1 to 5%. So I didn't use the lowest 1% because there's some really strange numbers in there, right? So you got some people who I think are natural gamblers, and they may make $250,000 a year in salary, but their net worth is minus $10 million, okay? Because they are good earners and stupid at managing money or whatever's going on there. It's a very strange group, okay? And so that lowest 1 to 5% is a better measure of our lower socioeconomic class, people who are struggling to get by. And so their salary more closely reflects their. So you can bring that one up, and you can do it with that data set. And here it is for that one, or what have you. And again, I've got more because it's 4 percentage points. So I got a couple hundred in here, right? And you actually have another sheet that explains what each of these are, but they're a little more understandable. The first one is their net worth. So the person who was 61st, the family, they had a net worth of minus $74,000, right, in their family. Their average age, the age of the primary breadwinner in the family is 32. I have a race code, so we know we can look and see what that would be, nominal data. Educational class, I'd have to look that one up, but I think that's a 0 is like no high school degree, and a 1 is a high school degree, and a 2 is some college, and a 3 is a college degree, and a 4 is graduate school, that sort of thing, right? It's ordinal data, right? Education, though, is number of years of education. So this person has 17 years of formal education. This person has 12, the head of household in that family. Here's somebody with 9 years of formal education. I have there's another way of putting the same net worth value out here. Okay, for some reason it's in there twice. Liquidity is how much cash they have on hand and available to live off of. So you get to your wealthiest group, and you got a lot of people with real high net worth who are living paycheck to paycheck because they got it all invested in something and it's not accessible, right? How much debt they're carrying, you have to spread this out to see. Person number 1 here is carrying $81,000 worth of debt. Person number 2, oh my goodness, is carrying $672,000 worth of debt. So their net worth is minus $73,000. They must own a pretty decent home or what have you, and they actually may not be in bad shape. You have an income bracket here. It shows their net income. So person number 1's the family's making $33,000 a year. Person number 2's $52,000 a year. Here's a person making $86,000 a year as the breadwinner for the family, and they're pretty low on the scale. So something's going on here. And so you can pick 2 of these variables and do the calculations with it. The last thing I want to show you then, I hope it's out here, and we'll call it quits on this, is, oh, come on. Data sets for homework. Okay, this third one here actually is not the overall sample. It is an explanation of all the variable titles. So if we open this one in the middle here and you download it, what you get is a sheet where I've written out that race, 1 is white, non-Hispanic, 2, 3, I don't know why I missed 4, but anyways. Educational class, no high school diploma. So I explain each of the variables to you. So when you come down here and you see, I see, I didn't write it out. This is from the website. So there's variables down here. You can look up your variable and see what it is. Okay? So education, the highest completed grade by the head of household, sort of thing. And so you can pick your variables and that'll help you do it. So you've got that file there to help you. Other questions for me? Anything else? Sound like I heard you packing up a few minutes ago, but I didn't want to send you off without seeing this. Feel free to contact your teammates. Get your teams up and running a little bit. If you want to discuss some of this, that's healthy discussion. I don't have a problem with it. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Oh, so to turn it in, you just mail it to my Gmail. Okay, just mail it to my Gmail and I'll have it. Let's see. Let me, if I don't, I can bring it.
Did we pick a date yet?
Data structure
What day
class.
did we pick? Tomorrow?
Yeah, because I'm
Yeah, no.
I just got a new laptop. So he was
Yep.
Do I have it?
Well, so it, and I probably should have made this more clear. A population in a sample, you have to know the context. But based on, it's how I define it. So I'm saying that it's a sample of 20 over a period. Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I said if it were the 20 historical weeks of this office, that would be the population. Okay? Okay, it is a sample by default. Yes.
Yes, we're open at 9. I was gonna say something.
Right?
Yes. Which was Monday to Friday. So like they would come in.
So I would say you could just answer down there, right? Or I've had students highlight them, okay, and just highlight it yellow. You put like A, B, C.
Yes.
So however you want to do it. But yeah, you do want to help me understand which one.
If you have your phone, I can put you can Google it.
So if I were you, I would include this for each data set, each variable that you pick, so 4 times. And then beneath it, I would write the mean for my variable is this, the mean is this, so forth. You can even, if you want, within the body of that, write. If I ask a discussion question, what conclusions can you draw? You could write it right out in there on the spreadsheet. Okay, the only real written thing I have is that. Make sense? Okay, good. Yep. And I'm very nice on this first go. Right, everybody's figured it out, so we'll be fine. Yep, thank you. Yep, have a good one.
Oh, in the morning and come and get her. Okay. Like let them sleep.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay, so then you can drop them off at Mississippi. See, that would be hard because I'd only be there 10 hours. So yeah, so he would, because then you would want him to. He could be there till 6 a.m. if he came later. But yeah, so that would be the only dilemma because they can only do 10 hours at the center. But he would have to. I think that's the 30 year. Yeah. See, that would be too long. Let me see. I gotta see. And sorry, I've been up since 5, so I'm thinking about. But let me give you my information. And so let me see what we can work out. I know we have some. I think some of the nurses do 12 hours. So because we have some nurses. Let's see. We'll see if we can work it out. Area code. I'll give you the number. The name of the center is the Elijah Academy. And so that way you can pull it up and look at it. It's the Elijah Academy. It's THEELIJAH. And then Academy. Then should. Put in Google. So that's it. So, okay, so this is the school year. that's it. Well, my stars is 4.8 at our center.
Oh, is it? Yep, yep.
We had literally one guy, he didn't even put a comment, but he was just upset because he just wanted things.
I love it when I go get my car done serviced or whatever, and they say to me on the way out, now they only count 5 stars.
Yeah. Oh, see, Enterprise is like that too.
Exactly, and it's like,
Yep.
so if you're gonna rate me, give me 5 stars.
5 stars, that's
And
it.
they'll actually
And
tell
they-
you
and
that.
they- And everything's an F if it's not an A.
Exactly. I said,
Yep.
somebody's not quite understanding how to manage that system.
Where do you live? In Ocean. Oh. Okay. You drive all the way here. Oh my.
From where?
Ocean. Goshen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
I taught an MBA class for Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University at Fort Knox, and one of the guys in the class was a state trooper for Indiana. And about a third of the time he was coming from northern Indiana.
Wow.
He'd have to drive 6 hours each way to come to class.
One of the guys in my group, he drives from, I think it's almost 2 hours.
So, like,
Transportation.
who can do the basic thing?
Um,